transformation, which you might have guessed is a little bit of that's going on around the country. Well, I mean, at some level. So this is very significant. So we're talking about transformation via intensification. Many astrologers will talk about this from many, many, many angles, but what is actually happening is an intensification of energy at the highest level possible. And because this energy is intense, everything that is running the way it is running becomes far more intensified. And because it's far more intensified, we have what we like to call intense polarization. And you might have noticed that in the world too. In the old days, we would just squabble back and forth, but now everyone comes out of their corner, makes a contact, goes ballistic, runs into the corner, is going to come out and destroy the opposite side. This is not a bad thing, it's a very interesting thing. And you see this for sure in the political field, which I discussed last time, so I don't have to repeat that. But we're going to look at several other areas where this issue of what I like to call intense polarization is occurring during this time. Well, so what's the point of all this? Why do we have this, death, regeneration, rebirth? Because Pluto, astrologically, most people are familiar with the symbol for Mars, which is a little circle with an arrow, the male symbol, and the symbol for Venus, which is a circle with a little cross underneath. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. The other way you can draw Pluto, which is helpful, is like a Mars 10 times bigger. So if Mars is your warrior, your militant, your assertive, aggressive energy, Pluto is Darth Vader. So you have that extreme energy of extreme light, extreme darkness. And it's, in my opinion, this intensification that produces transformation. Whether you're ready for it or not is immaterial. It's like when the outer planets are discovered, the archetype they represent comes into physical expression, whether we're ready for it or not. So the very first outer planet was discovered was Uranus, right at the beginning of the American Revolution. And it's no surprise Uranus represents freedom, independence, autonomy, don't tell me what to do. We're a very free, independent country. Pluto, 1930s, Hitler Mafia, the atomic bomb. Get the idea of the power and the transformation? So in this time of very intense, powerful transformation, the question becomes, what is your response to all of this? And the response, and the thing you want to remember, is that everything is going to be okay. Because why does this happen? Because in working with clients, I like to emphasize what I call the 3 basic A's. Awareness, attention, and attitude. Awareness, attention, and attitude. We're mostly awareness, consciousness expressing through the physical form, and that's something we forget every single day. And particularly people that are more sensitive, which most people connected to the center would be much more sensitive. I've noticed that people that are more sensitive are more easily trapped in this transformational cycle. And how does this work? So you have awareness, and your essential awareness, which is unlimited and non-local without any variation to it, is directed by attention and attitude. By that I mean what you look at, where you focus, where you put your attention, and your thoughts and feelings about it, your attitude about it. And the thing with that is you literally become what you put your attention upon. So I like to teach with this, column A, column B, as a practical use of life. As we live our life, there's 2 columns that we live in, column A, column B. What's column A? Oh, I like it. I love everything in column A. I like this column, all the people, places, and things in it. Column B, no, not so much. Don't like it, don't want to be around it. Most human beings spend 90% of their time in column B. Consciously or unconsciously, they're not aware of this. And not being aware of this, they give their attention to this and develop a column B attitude. Again, what's in column B? I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't want it. It's too hot. This line's too long. This line at the faster, it's not going fast enough. I don't want it. I don't like it. And it's so conditioned and so habitual, we don't realize how much of the 24 hours a day we're in a state, I don't like it, I don't want it. I don't like it, I don't want it. We want to be living more over here. Oh, I like this, I love this, which is why the first practice in life usually taught is joyful appreciation. I'm not interested in what's going wrong, what's going bad. Tell me what you like, tell me what you appreciate. Tell me what's good for you. And this is why gratitude, they also call it gratitude. And then there's the thing about using the specific terms gratitude versus joyful appreciation. I really like joyful appreciation. And most human beings aren't very grateful. We're just not very appreciative creatures. We're probably the most ungrateful things in the galaxy is my guess. So the practice of gratitude and a joyful appreciation to your benefit, above that is then intentionally bringing goodwill or blessings to everybody and everything you meet. But even the start of the day, see, most people respond to what's in front of them. And the universe is changing very fast all the time, very fast all the time, changing, back into the same thing. Because we're creatures of habit. And the world spins in front of us, and whatever it is, we just respond to. And we respond a lot in column B. I don't like it, I don't want it. All negative emotion comes from, I don't like it, I don't want it. So in a time where, what I call it, intense polarization? So a time where everything is magnified, everything is intensified, everything's in your face, you forget you're in column B. And so politically, every side hates the other side. I don't want you, I don't like you, I don't want you, I do like you. Well, what happens from an energetic level in discussing this? When you focus on what you do not want, what you do not like, what you want out of your world, this negative limited state of energy begins to ripple into every single facet of your life. And people go, that's not me, it's that asshole over there. It's that jerk in the other party. It's that blah, 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 orange-haired monkey or those crazy liberals over there, not me. But the recognition, you literally become vibrationally what you put your attention upon. So there you go. So what's my recommendation for this? Just let it slide. Tell me more what you like. Tell me more what you love. But again, the more sensitive a person is, and most people in metaphysics, spiritual practice, etc., are far more sensitive than the average person. And the more sensitive a person is, they are more likely to get trapped into the attention attitude mode unless they bring their awareness to it. And we will forget this and slip into it every single day. So every single day, bring you back to the state. I have the choice of living in column A or column B. Column A, column B. Choose column A as much as possible. So I talked about many issues at the time, and a lot of them actually came true. Well, actually all of them came true. But talking about cycles astrologically in the 2017 lecture, although in my personal opinion, that little flu bug thing and, thing they had in 1918, that Spanish influenza thing that we got here in 2020, I actually thought it would be last winter, 2019. I was thinking, I'm going to put my money on 2019. And when it didn't occur, and looking at the astrological cycles, I thought, oh my goodness, it's going to be even a little bit bigger now. And even most good astrologers, when they were looking at the daily transits, because when I pull up my program, I'll see the chart for the day. It was astonishing at the beginning of this year, 2020, to see how much was gathering in the sign of Capricorn. And the sign of Capricorn, by the way, is one of the strongest signs of form and structure in the outer world. It's your institutions, it's your structures, it's your organizations. It's the form and structure of everything, outer and inner, in your life. All of that is subject to collapse and resurrection and reconstruction at this time. All of it. And if you're not flexible and adaptable to it, not going to run so well for you. Again, awareness, attention, and attitude. Focus on what you want out of everything. You can complain about this, you can complain about this, you can notice the lack, notice the limitation, whine about this. You're stirring up ongoing, repetitive, negative vibration that will seep into every aspect of your life and manifest in so many ways you cannot even begin to believe it. It is not to your advantage to hang out in column B. There's nothing wrong with column B. You have to experience the diversity of life. People go, why weren't we born in paradise? Why weren't we born in Pleasantville, that happy little land of Pleasantville, in astral Pleasantville, where everything was just precious and nice? There is no better place to be in the universe other than in a world of tremendous diversity of all this crap you don't want, all this wonderful stuff, and where you have the power of free will choice. Because it's far superior to be in that place than any other place, trust me. So the first topic I want to talk about, this is not controversial at all. Of course, politics is probably the biggest one, with the extreme polarity, the hate, the dislike. If you do not see God in all things as the Jesuits state, or see good in all things, or the blessing in all things, if you hyper-focus on limitation of any kind, whether it's in yourself or any other person, you are co-creating ongoing limitation. And yet that is the status quo. I talked about this repeatedly at the last lecture over and over, and I noticed it made no difference with most people. I don't like this, I hate this, don't like this, get rid of it, eliminate it. It just tripled in size. Energy flows where attention goes. We are energy manifesting creatures. So be aware of that. Or not, because you have free will, it's up to you. That's why I love it when my friends suffer. People go, "What? You always say that all the time. I love it when my friends suffer." Yeah, because you're riding your car down the road of life. And when you think, feel, speak, and act, which are the 4 functions of a human being and our primary creative process, thinking, feeling, speaking, acting, in alignment with inner spirit, inner being, the ride is joyful. But when you start thinking and feeling stupid and speaking and acting stupidly, your car veers off to the side of the road. And it's a rough ride. And you think really stupid, life is no good, it's never going to work out, there's no hope on this, it's just a big hot mess. You're down in the ditch. How's the ride down there? It sucks. Yeah, good. That's a good thing. Lets you know you're off the road. How would you live life without feedback? The whole point of all law of manifestation, it's not about the car, the job, the relationship, the mate, anything. Manifestations at the primary level just show you where your energy is flowing. You don't like where it's going, shift your energy. So the first topic I'm going to talk about is climate. No controversy there. Global warming, climate change. Oh my God. Almost as much conflict as politicians, because you will have extreme polarization in this thing of climate change. But I think you're going to hear and discover some interesting things about climate that you've never heard before. So on the climate thing, I realized several years ago, I don't know anything about climate change. People talk about it all the time, and they say this, and they say this, and do this, and do that, but I don't know anything about it. So I studied it for the last few years very, very, very extensively and found some very interesting things. And I want to point out right here in the beginning that there is a big difference between global warming and climate change. Technically, it's global warming now. A lot of people aren't clear on this, but global warming is the primary issue we're looking at. Climate change is just the end results then of global warming. That's how the formula works. People interchangeably use those, but the primary thing was global warming. Anthropogenic global warming then produces effects in the climate, although today people just say climate change. They rarely talk about global warming, and that's not exactly accurate because the primary focus is on climate change. But there's a big difference between climate change and environmentalism. And this I want to make clear, because when I talk about this to people sometimes, they get all upset and I go, no, wait a minute, you're confusing environmentalism with climate change. They're not the same thing. Environmentalism is the pollution, the crap, the garbage that we throw out in the atmosphere, the disregard for nature. I'm very pro-environmentalism. And people say, well, there's a slight connection between the two, and there is, but there is a big difference. We are dirty little pigs inhabiting the planet Earth, is what I'm saying. As a Jesuit priest once said, the human race is like a manifestation of termites just infecting the planet in our practice of pollution and trash and chemicals and fertilizer runoff and all types of stuff beyond imagination, right? So I'm very pro-environmental. We should really be paying attention to how we're polluting the planet, and that topic has been given a back burner at this point in time. Focus is on climate change, not so much environmentalism. And I also want to talk about science itself, because part of the issue of climate change and stuff is the science. It's all about the science. You got to do the science thing. And science is a wonderful thing. I compare science to Christianity. You go, really? How's that? I go, it's just like Christianity. Christianity is a wonderful religion. It's just unfortunate that so few people practice it. Okay? It's a wonderful religion. It's just too bad so few people actually practice it. You know, the Jesus thing, love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. You know, we'll do everything but that. Science is the same way. Science is a very effective tool for discovering the nature of things when practiced properly, just like Christianity, when practiced properly. A lot of science these days is not practiced properly. That's because scientists use science. And scientists are human beings, not the pure practice of science itself, which is supposed to give an objective, non-attached, impartial answer. And a true scientist is open to change at any time. Just give me new evidence. This. Give me new evidence. We'll go in this new direction. So when you hear phrases like, the science is settled, I trust the scientist, and we have scientific consensus, you're talking to someone who has no idea what true science is. There is such thing as scientific consensus, but that actually has nothing to do with science, which is an impartial investigation of the universe around us. There are just a few things in the past. I'd like to give an example. Continental drift. No, totally wrong until it totally changed. No scientist accepted continental drift until every scientist accepted continental drift. Comets. All the previous ideas of what a comet is have now been completely overturned. Cosmological magnetism. Up to 1999, cosmology has changed unbelievably in the last 20 years. no magnetism in the universe. It's of no value whatsoever. We see it nowhere, and it plays no significant part in the cosmos. Totally changed 20 years later. It's one of the major forces in the universe. It's discovered everywhere, okay? Catastrophism, evolution, antiseptics. You can go on and on and on, where in the field of science, things that were adamantly the scientific consensus were completely overturned later. And you know what? That's a good thing. We actually honor in science scientists who were completely wrong. That seems weird. Why do we honor scientists that were completely wrong? Because the practice of true science says, with the data we have right now, we've come to these conclusions. Give me new data, new information, we will shift the model. That's true science. They're open-minded. Yeah, they were wrong, but that's all the data they had. They didn't have all the data, and we acknowledge they're really worthwhile effort to do so, okay? Now, there is a difference between climate and weather. Weather is the local response, and usually it's often said that if something doesn't change within 15 to 30 years, that's a weather phenomenon, short range. Climate is long-term. So what I want to look at is the climate of the planet Earth. And to do that, we're going back almost 1 million years, because climate's the big picture. And many things I didn't even know until I began to study climate itself. So my recommendation, when you're studying anything about global warming, climate change today, make sure you always go back to at least 1900. This is a major point in the study of climate and global warming and climate change. Don't just stop at 1970, don't stop at 1950, all the way back at least to 1900. Many sloppy climate scientists do not like the past. In fact, climate alarmists, and I don't mean that as a pejorative term, I don't want to get into this bad, wrong, good, right thing and all that, but I'm saying always check the timeline on the graphs and information you look at. And we'll see if it can show up in the camera here. I don't know if that's visible. Can you pull mine up just separately so I can get it tilted? Okay, can everyone see this graph?
Yeah.
Okay, you see it's from 1980 to 2020, and these are the US wildfires going from 1980 to 2020. And you see it kind of goes up here. And you go, oh my gosh, the last 40 years, these wildfires are just out of control. It's global warming. And this was presented in either the state of Colorado or the University of Colorado on a single web page where there were 8 graphs showing all the devastating effects of global warming. And this was one of them. And the first thing I noticed was they all had different date sets. What do you mean by date sets? Where they started and where they ended. I thought, well, that's really interesting. But look at this. It's just going up. It's just terrible. It's like starts under 2 million and goes to like 10 million acres just in the last 40 years. We must be burning up the planet. Except, excuse me for going over here. This is the chart from the United States Department of Agriculture where they got this, Forest Service, from, now it doesn't go to 1900, it goes to 1916 to our current time. And do you notice anything about this? Everyone can see this? You go back here to 1916 and you see this humongous leap. And then it comes down and it goes to our current time, which is way here on the bottom. And in fact, this University of Colorado, and you won't be able to see this, but right here where these 2 arrows are, this was extended out to 2020. See how flat it is? This is the actual history of forest fires in the United States from about 1900 to today. And you look at that and go, you might come to a different conclusion. Have we gone wildfire berserk? Are we burning up the planet with extreme heat? It just seems to me that's not the case. And you get a different representation from those 2 graphs. And I prefer full information and accuracy as opposed to not. So on this page, there were 8 graphs. Every single one of them was date selected. You often find with the Arctic North Pole, one of my favorites, the good old North Pole, the Arctic, it'll always start around 1979. All the records will start in 1979. Well, because guess why? That's when it had the most ice recently. And you go back to the 20s and stuff, and it's like there were times where the Arctic was already empty in the last century. There's like virtually no ice on it. But you're not going to hear that report because we got a little agenda going. So what's our climate history on Earth? So Earth, we have tremendous climate, but you go back 800,000 years and something occurs which is pretty amazing. We have 100,000 years of glaciers. then about 12,000, 14,000, about 12,000, 100,000 years of glaciers. You know, those are those big things of ice that are 1, 2 miles thick, and they come down from the north, and they actually, the last one came down to the north tip of Nebraska and New York City. In fact, it created Long Island that comes off New York City, was actually the edge of the glacier pushing dirt. Long Island was created by the glaciers pushing dirt into Long Island. And that's where they stopped. If you're here in Oklahoma, we could have taken the car and driven up there to go visit the glaciers, which would have been fun. But the glaciers were down here, and so the glaciers come back every 100,000 years. Then about 12,000 years of called the interglacial warming period, which we're in now. And our interglacial warming period started about 10, 11,000 years ago. So where do you think we are this warming period? Yeah, we're kind of coming at the end of our warming period. And they certainly expect another 100,000 years of glacial. Well, why does this happen? Well, even Greg Braden, we know Greg Braden, the great metaphysical social teacher, discovered this himself. It's called the Milankovitch Cycles. The climate of Earth is primarily focused or driven or run by natural cycles. And the Milankovitch cycles are after Milutin Milankovitch, a Serbian geophysicist and astronomer who discovered what he called the Milankovitch cycles. And there are 3 movements of the Earth. One is eccentricity, the other is obliquity, and the other is precession. So the planet Earth doesn't just stand straight up like this on the axis, it has a little tilt to it. That's called its obliquity. And this tilt of the Earth changes from about 22 degrees to 24 degrees over time. Over about a 41,000 year cycle, the radius of the axis of the Earth also spins around like a top in about a 22,000 year cycle. So how does this do, what does it have to do with glaciers and these little warm periods? The orbit of the Earth around the sun is not a perfect circle, it's an ecliptic. It has an eccentricity. And when it moves away from the sun for 100,000 years, it cools off. And when it comes over here in this 12 to 14,000 time period, it loops around the sun much closer, and we warm up. Cools off, warms up, cools off, warms up. And guess what we're heading to? We're heading to the end of the starting to cool off phase on planet Earth. It could be 1,000 years from now, it could be 1,500 years from now, but it's not too far off, okay? So my point, and the point I make, is that climate change in the large picture is primarily natural. We're in what is called the Holocene era. And the Holocene era is about 18,000 years ago, the glaciers started to melt. The temperature was really low here. Then the temperature started coming up like this, and it reached our normal temperature range, and then has been declining to our present time. Now, this is very important to understand, and we're going to do it backwards. So today we call it the modern warm period, which people think, oh, we're just burning up, the planet is exploding, there's just heat everywhere, we're just melting like the Wicked Witch of the West, we're just melting. No, here's our modern era. If you go back in time like this, you will go to 1850 to 1350. So in other words, 1350 to 1850 was a tremendous cold snap. And in the bottom of this was the Little Ice Age, which went to about 1640 to 1710. Then as you go back in the past, the Middle Ages from about 900 AD to 1350, centered around 1,000 years ago, was called the medieval warming period, which was warmer than today. And people argue this tremendously, and I've had several clients who actually, all these climate alarmists are quite interesting folks. They don't like the past because the past reveals we have always been far warmer than we are in our modern era. So to give you an idea, in the Middle Ages, that's when they built all the cathedrals in Europe and all these great churches, and the crops were flourishing and people were thriving to the max. And the Vikings went up to Greenland because before 900 AD, you couldn't get up into Greenland. It was too icy and frozen. Why? Because from 900 to 500, going back, was the other dark age where it got cool. And before that was the Roman period, which was warmer than today. Now, so the Middle Ages, we haven't even reached the medieval warm period as of today. People thrived tremendously during warm times, not during cold times. So you go back and say, well, how can you prove that? What's the evidence of that? Oh, plenty of evidence. My favorite is the Mendenhall Glacier field in Alaska. The Mendenhall Glacier field in Alaska is half melted back. Oh my gosh, they showed us pictures from 1890 and those glaciers were starting to melt. It's just terrible. This glacier shouldn't melt. Nothing should ever change. It's just not natural in Earth. So as these glaciers melted back, guess what they found underneath those glaciers? Hundreds of thousands of acres of forest trees. Forest, yeah. Then they carbon dated them, exactly 1,000 years old. Well, you can't grow trees in Alaska right now in the Mendenhall Glacier field because there's half glaciers there. Yeah, it's too cold. We're not even as warm as we were in the Middle Ages. And you know what they also found 1,000 years ago, all through the entire north edge of Canada? Millions of acres of black spruce and other spruce trees. Well, there's no trees there now. Yeah, it's too cold. You can't grow them there. That's just here. See, some of the climate alarmists go, no, this Middle Age was just a phenomenon in Northern Europe only, didn't occur anywhere else in the world. Well, except for the 100 other places I could give you examples of. But I just love that. This forest, hundreds of thousands of acres of dead trees under the glacier fields because the forests were growing rampant at that time 1,000 years ago, okay? So when you go back in time, it's like this. Modern era, 1350, 1815 dip, little ice age dip, hot in the Middle Ages, another dip, 500, 900, really hot in the Roman period. Then you go back further. Warmer than the Romans was the Minoan warming period. Go back further. The second Holocene warming period, go back further. The first Holocene warming period, then the Holocene maximum. 8,000 years ago, it was massively warmer on this entire planet than today. And in fact, I have a little graph trying to show that if I can find it here. Oh, there it is. This one you might be seeing. So this shows, I think we can see that. This shows going back to about 11,000 years, and see it's real low here. The glaciers would be way down here. 18,000 years ago, the thing would be way down here. Warms up, and right here, which is about 8,000 years ago, is that tremendous heating thing. And something you notice, it's going down. See how it's going down? Because in the interglacial period, you start warm and start cooling off. So all these peak cycles are slightly cooler, slightly cooler, slightly cooler, slightly cooler, okay? Until you have our present time. And so it's important to understand we're in this 12,000 year-ish Holocene period between glaciers. And it's not going to be too long, but we're going to be returning to the glacier field. I'd like to take a lot of analysis and hang around for a long time because I'd like to drive up to those glaciers and see what's cooking, okay? So, but it's important to understand this in the history because we act so weird when there's a slight increase in temperature. And that's a weird thing to say on planet Earth. This is my point. It's a weird thing to say when, yeah, but the Middle Ages were warmer, Romans were a lot warmer, the Minoans were a lot warmer, the Holocene periods were a lot warmer. It's not unusual at all. So you have to have this basic understanding of how the whole thing is running. See what I mean? The idea is that it should be 72 degrees outside all the time, 50% humidity, and no variation, no change. That's not the nature of planet Earth. So the big players in this human global warming is called anthropogenic global warming, which is the premise that man-made. I was gonna do the AGW all this time, but I thought that word is way too long to say every time, anthropogenic. So I'm just gonna go the traditional thing, man-made global warming. We're just gonna stick it on the men this time, man-made global warming. The CO2 from our fossil fuels is driving this tremendous heat maniacal rage going on. As we'll see, that's not exactly the case. People say, what, you don't believe in global warming? No, I'm stating the planet is definitely warming. And I'm stating the planet is going to continue to warm for 600 years at a natural nonstop level, as we'll see. The planet's going to continue to warm for 600 years no matter what we do about anything. Why? Because we're returning to the next Roman time period, the Roman warm period. That Middle Age thing was not the return. That peak of the Romans, Minoans, Holocene maximum. So the last one was the Roman warm period. They were growing wine grapes in North Britain. You know, and people, oh, there's no evidence for that. No, there's only thousands upon thousands of bits of physical evidence. It was so much warmer, and the Romans thrived. The world thrives under warm periods. We're returning in about 600 years from now to what we could call the second Roman warm period. But it's not going to be as warm as the Rome period. It's going to be slightly less, but it's going to be quite a bit warmer than today, slowly though, over the next 600 years. So the players in the human-driven global warming thing that we see all in the media all day long are the IPCC, NOAA, and NASA. Anyone here know IPCC? Well, they're the main agent for global warming. It's the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was created in 1988. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was created in 1988 to study CO2-driven man-made warming. That was their goal. That was their objective. Not to study the whole climate. No, this is very important. To study man-made global warming, which they've been doing since then. Now, what a lot of people don't realize too is prior to this 1988, MIT and other universities in the United States were studying climate change already and had already formulated this CO2 driven is going to drive and heat up the atmosphere thing since then, okay? Which is very important to understand because we're going to come back to MIT. NOAA began in 1970 under Richard Nixon because NOAA is the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration thing. They did a lot with climate and weathers and hurricanes and all types of stuff. NASA began in '58 for the study of space science, but NASA was pulled in because it does satellites, satellite observation, upper atmosphere things, so it's connected with climate also. So these are the three players. So the main thing about the IPCC is that they're really not scientists themselves. The IPCC is a clearinghouse, and they bring in all these scientists, and every once in a while the IPCC publishes these reports of what's going on and gives their explanation and attitude, okay? And what's interesting about the IPCC is the one thing they were told to do was examine what we call equilibrium of climate sensitivity, ECS. This is real important to understand because when you put anything on the planet, a gas, a climate, a liquid, we ask, well, is it going to change the environment? Some things do nothing. A lot of things do nothing to the climate. But the premise was that man-made CO2 from fossil fuels was radically changing the planet. And that was their mandate, to study this and this alone. They don't do very much great science. I'm not really liking to pick on anyone or anything, but oh my gosh, the practice of science under the IPCC and global alarmists is really not very good at all. Not very good at all. In real science, the data drives the science. In other words, what you find and discover drives your model, okay? Not the other way around. It's not, and in real science, the data drives the truth, not the agenda, not your mission. You discover things, you have to change your model, you have to change your structure. That's the point of discovery in science. This is not with the IPCC. Their agenda is to find the reason climate is warming because of CO2 man-made, regardless. And who I blame for this humongous mess in this climate debacle of conflict and just opposition is the media. We have probably the worst journalism in recorded history. It's probably never been really good, but the media is mind-boggling of what's just thrown out into the public, okay? So in the third assessment report in 2001, so the IPCC is hanging around since 1988, and every few years they'll pop out a report, and here's what's going on, and here's our computer models. They are totally driven by computer models, these scientific models. And in 2001 came out the very famous hockey stick. Everyone here heard of the hockey stick? Hockey stick, hockey stick, no, hockey stick, yeah. Love this one. Sorry for the confusion of getting all my papers messed up here. Where's my hockey stick? It's in here somewhere. The hockey stick, it's always the last place you look for anything. Because you wouldn't look further, you know, that's why they're stopping. Right. This was a graph done by Michael Mann, a scientist named Jones, and a scientist named Briffa. And they were studying the historical temperature record from tree rings, corals, ice cores, and just historical records. And as Michael Mann was working on this with two other professors, the IPCC got wind of him, and they liked what he was doing. They saw his first report, and they go, we'd like you to do a report for the IPCC. And he goes, well, I'm working with Jones and Briffa, and we'll assemble one. And that's when the conflict came in, because this is what's called the hockey stick. And this one's not even the severe hockey sticks, because it's pretty big. You can see this is the past here, and it goes to the future pretty constant. Then right here at the end, it just shoots up like crazy. That's our modern time. And when the IPCC saw this, they published it for the next decade. They published 6 versions of this in the very first report in 2001. But there's a little issue with that because quite a few climate scientists claim this is absolute fraud. How can it be absolute fraud? They're scientists. They're just reporting data and all this. And the little bit of story behind it is quite interesting because Michael Mann, who's quite an interesting figure as a climate scientist, I'll have to put it that way very kindly. So this became the icon because it's like, look in the past, it's just, look, we've just been going along easy. We've just been floating along easy. Then suddenly we're just going through the roof. We're just exploding. And I don't think you can see this one. Forest fire. Sorry about that, peeps. That's our Holocene. Yeah, you won't be able to see this one. In 1990, in what the first IPCC report, they gave a little look at history. And you might be able to see this, if not, that's not a problem. But you see here, this is the past, this is the future. You see this big bump here? See this big bump above the line? That's the warming period of the medieval ages. And you see these lumpy things on the bottom? That's the little ice age that occurred, you know, from about 1350 to 1850. And it came in segments like that. There were specific cooling periods. And then you come up to the present time, which is this little bump on the right. This was actually printed by IPCC in, again, 1990. 11 years later, they printed this. And this is real hard to see, but right here on the bottom is this almost continuous straight line, goes back as far as this, and this just disappeared. The medieval period just disappeared. They erased it. Comes along, and then it shoots up really, this one's really good because it really shows how absurdly high it shoots up over here, right here to this point. And people are like, wow, they trumpeted that thing for 10 years, that the past has been smooth as a lake, and we're just shooting through the roof. But a little bad thing happened. In 2009, called ClimateGate. I'm going to read this because it's so good. ClimateGate began in November 2009 when someone hacked the servers at the Climate Research University at the University of East Anglia, okay, the UEA. This attacker stole thousands of emails, research computer files, and put them on the internet right before the Copenhagen Summit on climate change. Now, why was that interesting? Because these emails showed not what you wanted to be shown. And among all these emails, my favorites were the first one where a director of the IPCC wrote man and said, we see you're working on this tree ring thing, but you need to understand that when we publish, now that was in 1999, when we publish 2 years later, we're going to favor any report that shows man-made global warming. We're going to favor only a report that shows man-made global warming. So Mann's had kind of bumped up there at the end, but you won't believe the reason why. And so he got with Jones, and Jones was, okay, we can do this. Briffa wasn't too hot about this, and there was this correspondence where Briffa was saying, yeah, but my wood tring things kind of show that medieval age periods, and yours and Jones don't show any. And my wood tring things actually go down from 1960. Because the issue is whether these wood tring things were reliable, and they're not. And so the dialogue was basically, well, you know, we're going to have to fix this. We're going to have to adjust this, okay? This was all covert. And see, what this shows here, so what Michael Mann did was literally eliminate 30 years of Briffa's data. Going in the wrong direction? Just take it out. It's not a problem. Just remove it completely. Take it out. The joke about this hockey stick thing is they found out these wood trings aren't reliable indicators of temperature anyway. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this is not science. This is not how you behave. So this graph here, so about 2005, 2006, a Canadian geologist gentleman was looking at their initial research and he noticed this amazing thing. This graph here, which see how these things stop here, going down, they just stop there, right here? And he goes, holy crap, they cut out 33 years of data. And this is what it would have done. See how it goes down? That was Briffa stuff. It's going down. And when you see the finished product, oh no, that puppy shoots straight up and it's all blended together perfectly and all this. What he had done, what Michael Mann had done, is at the end there, he substituted satellite temperature readings, which were not even the data they were looking at. That's not how you do science. You don't like, we're going to study frogs, but we'll put in some platypus thing at the end. Or we're measuring this in quarts, but we'll switch it to liters in the end. He literally put in completely different, inaccurate data, and it just shoots through the roof. And so many climate scientists call that absolute fraud, and I can see where they're coming from. So they were caught. This was quite an embarrassment in 2009, 2010, quite an embarrassment. So, because it was just like, so they took away 30 years of data, they polished things, they eliminated his, they blended together. It's a fraudulent stick. And where the hell's the Middle Ages? Someone in 2012, went back, group of scientists, and redid their research. Here's my point. See this big hump in the middle? See this big hump? Goes big old hump. You know what that is? That's the Middle Ages. from their data, their research. They even adjusted the data and research to hide this. His is just totally flat. And what's interesting, if you no need to look, on the original, at this time, he shows it as minus 0.2, and this is 2.0 positive higher. He actually even reversed it, even inserted down. Why is that? And I'll tell you why early, because the CO2 causing all global warming does not work in the past. It cannot explain these massive heat rises, repeated heat rises in the past, because CO2 was virtually non-existent. We had the most humongous heat rise from 1900 to the war, 45, a little thing called the Dust Bowl. Remember the Dust Bowl thing? Yeah, it got quite hot, more hot than you might imagine. When you look at the records, it's beyond astonishing. CO2 had plummeted to almost nothing at that time. How did the CO2 make it? There's no CO2 around. Why did it rise? See what I mean? Isn't that amazing? So 8 committees, Penn State, because Michael Mann is with Penn State, the East Anglia University, and 6 other agencies all got together to investigate. And you know what they found? We just found no evidence of fraud or scientific misconduct. There's just nothing wrong with that. And we're asserting the scientific consensus that global warming is a result of human activity remains unchanged. Wow, science. Science is great. What the public does not know is that NASA and NOAA, see, we have too much trust in our scientists. It's not that I don't trust scientists, it's just that I recognize that scientists are people. And people will take out 30 years of data, they'll adjust data, they'll blend data, they'll put in totally unrelated different data to show a picture. Because that was really bad for the IPCC and the world, because that was 10 years of fraud and misconduct of that hockey stick showing, oh my God, what are we doing to the planet? Look, it's just been so flat. It's just been so flat, and then now it's just shooting up through the roof like crazy. NASA and NOAA, again, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, adjust and estimate all temperature readings. And you're thinking, well, no, you just take a temperature thing and you report it. And you go out and you measure them and just report it. Well, no, not exactly. Every single temperature reading is adjusted or estimated. Yeah, it's so interesting. And they don't even hide that. They admit it. They even show the original and the adjusted temperatures. And the climate alarmist types are like, oh, no, that's fine. I trust the scientists because they're doing this scientifically. They know what they're doing. No, we trust this. But this will blow your mind. In 1995, 25 years ago, 12% of all records were either adjusted or estimated. And the estimation is really great. I love the estimation because it's like, we don't have 5 thermometers here in this country in Africa, so we're just going to estimate them. Yeah, that's science. We're just going to guess them. We're going to estimate them. That would not be like taking a temperature and reading it, I'm thinking, because like in the hospital, you actually, you take a temperature. We don't adjust it or estimate it. We actually take a temperature in the hospital. No, we don't have to do that here with climate. We adjust and estimate it. See, 1995, 12% of that was done. Do you know how much they adjust and estimate in 2020? 61%.
Wow.
It's on their websites. 61% of temperature readings are either adjusted or estimated at this time. And the last time I checked, it was at 49%. And I was kind of astonished, the 61%. And they said because of COVID, they didn't have workers working there, to process this stuff. So they just let the computers do their thing, okay? So this correction, I call it the correction, this correction of every single temperature and estimation, this correction amazingly matches the carbon dioxide ECS figures in the IPCC computer models. What does that mean? It means they need to cool the past and warm the present. Why? To show an increase of rates. Because if you go back and realize, oh my God, how friggin' hot it was from World War II to 1900, that's way too hot. And as you literally look at their own graphs, you see over the decades, they reduce the past and increase the present. Then someone had the brilliance to look at this model, and they realized, okay, let's put in the correction, and it formed this perfect linear line, and this perfect increasing linear line. And you know what matched that increasing linear line? CO2 increase in the atmosphere. They are adjusting temperatures to match the CO2 increase in the atmosphere. Just coincidental, I'm sure. I'm not claiming it's anything of that, but it's like, that's the most astonishing friggin' match I've seen in my life, matching that CO2 rise line perfectly. So they cool the past, warm the present. Why? To show this rate increase. And I've even heard global climate scientists say, oh, you people complaining about, we're saying it's hot. We're cooling temperature for you. Why would you complain about stuff? We're cooling stuff. You're saying we're exaggerating stuff. We're cooling stuff. Yes, you're cooling the past in specific areas. Yes, you are cooling it, but you're not mentioning exactly what you're cooling, right? So Iceland, good old country of Iceland, has now, 3 years ago, issued their second complaint against NOAA. Why? And NASA. Because they're like, we sent you our temperature readings and you adjusted them warmer. Why are you doing this? Oh, well, we have our computer model. You know, our computer model, we just don't take your temperature because we don't think you have the capacity to actually take a temperature and read it. So we put it in our computer models and we adjust it. They made them put it back where it was. And that was the second time. 6 years earlier that was the first time. The Australian government also went to NOAA and said, why are you adjusting our temperatures? These aren't the temperatures we gave you. We're not idiots. We're scientists down here. We can take a friggin' temperature. And so now, oh no, you know, this is a very scientific, and all our followers totally, you know, they're trusting us. We're adjusting this. It's a science thing. We're adjusting these temperatures. And so they gave them back these 5 models that showed how the temperatures all adjusted and matched. You know, these were 5 independent adjustment and estimate resources, these 5 sources. Oh, they all match perfectly. Well, it turns out all 5 of them came from one source. One was NASA, one was NOAA, one was Japan. There was the GISS record and one other record. And they all get their temperatures data from one source. Of course they're going to match. And Australia caught it and called them on it and made them change the temperatures back. But people don't even realize this. If you really watch this, 6 years later they return them to the adjusted temperatures. They didn't leave it, they turned them up. It's like, wow. So the bottom line of this climate stuff that I maintain is this, that by the time of and see this climate gate, which was in 2009, 2010, was even worse than that. The Michael Mann had emails that they still maintain that had FOI in the title. FOI meant Freedom of Information, because they were being sued and challenged to expose all their research and all their emails in the Freedom of Information Act. And he had written 2 other scientists, we need to start deleting these emails. Wow. Yeah, delete this research email, delete these copies. We need to start deleting these emails. They didn't delete that email that told them to start deleting emails. And they did delete these emails. Is that science? Is that objectivity? I'm thinking a scam is up. I'm just thinking scam is up, okay? So it really went bad, and even astrologically, this was the point of the turning point in Pluto and Capricorn. See, Pluto and Capricorn is exposing all the garbage, floats to the surface. It's the breakdown of all this BS to the max. So the bottom line is this, that by 2010, 2011, this CO2 man-made driven model showed a huge overestimate of climate sensitivity. And what that means is all the computer models had outrageously overemphasized the amount of global warming and therefore climate change consequences that would have occurred by 2010. And even by then, so you have these graphs, and we've spent billions upon billions upon billions of dollars for these computer models, and they all shoot up like this, but they're all like in a thick column because there's the top 100 models. They go up like this, they go up like this. The actual temperature reading goes like this. Goes like this. And no one could refute this at the time. And what the media do about it, just ignored it. Just reported. And so the IPCC goes, well, we were just on the bottom. Our bottom models catch this. I think there was one model that was way low off the main grouping that barely caught the top of the actual temperatures. And their thing was, see, our models are correct. It just caught the bottom model. And you would think when that happens, your first reaction would be, we need to change the models. Our models aren't accurate. They're not accurately reporting this apocalyptic global warming, everything's going to melt and die on the planet type thing. We need to adjust our models. No, they have not adjusted their models, and their recent models are even projected higher. Now, why is that an issue? Because here's what happened. So on this hanging on the bottom, but a lot of climate scientists since 2010, 2011 are coming out of the woodwork and doing research and projects and bringing this up. But our current world, it's like what I call the global climate inquisition. This global climate thing and this polarization of Pluto has become like a friggin' religion. And it's so extreme that you mentioned to someone that, no, fossil fuels, yes, CO2 is a part of global warming. It's an insignificant part. It's not the major driver. It's like a teeny tiny part, see? So, oh my God, it's unbelievable. So Al Gore at the time made this remark, and I remember this because I saw this interview. He goes, well, yeah, we did exaggerate all the statements we made, but if we didn't exaggerate them, people wouldn't pay attention. Is that science? Shortly after that, about 3 years later, Al Gore sold his climate change organization for over $550 million to the Saudi Arabians. He got out of the game show. So many scientists are now coming out and showing an alternative approach, because in science, when your models do, here's my point, when your models do not work, your models need to be corrected. But that's not how the IPCC runs their models. Their models have one objective: show CO2 driving the entire climate change. And they're not accurate. So Nir Shaviv, I just love this guy. He's an Israeli-American physics professor at the Rasha Institute of Physics of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And he's a young guy. He works with cosmic rays, carbon-14, climate sensitivity to the sun, solar activity, and the limit CO2 plays in climate change. He used to agree with the original model. Oh, CO2 is driving the climate. We're warming up. We're just going to burn up like that. But no, he realizes now that CO2 is not the primary driver of climate change. And in 2018, the German Bundesrat Environment Committee invited him to speak at the German Parliament. And there he denied that carbon dioxide, CO2, had a substantial effect on climate change. And he claimed that the IPCC was ignoring scientific studies that clearly showed the sun was a major cause for climate change. They hate him. And the reason they hate him is because their only model is CO2-driven climate change. And if you discredit that or diminish it or take it away, they lose their trillions of dollars, trillions, that they've assembled for this CO2, we hate fossil fuels driven thing, right? So I'm not saying that there's an issue with IPCC, but I'm saying there is an issue with IPCC. They're just blindly doing their thing. So, I mean, they just, man, there is so much character assassination in climate science. The public is totally unaware of this. It's almost this rampant fear of the status quo model of CO2 man-made warming, CO2 man-made warming. If you disagree with us, you're a climate change denier, just a denier. And they even labeled him a climate change denier. Put the evil D on him, just like the Scarlet A. We're going to put the evil D. He's a denier. He's not a denier of climate change. He's denying that CO2 is the primary cause of climate change. He's not saying it doesn't play a part. It does. As he pointed out here, it's an insignificant part. It's a small part, which was proven in 2010. That model hasn't changed. Their models are still going up higher, and the actual readings are still staying low. And the significance of that is very important. So we're living in a time of the global warming Inquisition, okay? And it's worse than you think in terms of this Inquisition, because there's a famous, he was actually a tropical meteorologist, Dr. Bill Gray at the Colorado State University. Lovely gentleman. People loved him. He was renowned worldwide as a meteorologist. He actually started the modern hurricane forecasting system, the National Hurricane Center. He was one of the major persons in setting that up. So in 1993, he was invited by Al Gore to come to Washington to discuss climate change. And he informed Al Gore, says, I'd be happy to come, love to participate, but you need to know I kind of totally don't agree with everything you pretend that CO2 is the main cause of global warming. He goes, there's many factors involved here in climate. So he was uninvited. 60 days later, all his funding was cut off. He had massive funding for decades before the university and from the state. All the federal and state funding was cut off completely. He goes, I would walk down the university halls and no one would even look at me. They didn't want to be cut off too. That is way more common than you can even imagine. Global warming Inquisition. So the three great climate scientists published a paper in 2013, Fry, Gillett, and Zires. And here's what they pointed out. This was the pinnacle of just, here's the facts, you can refuse to accept them, here's the facts. So they wrote, the global mean surface temperature, which means the surface of the planet, they call it the global mean surface temperature, over the past 20 years, which would be from 1993 to 2012, because they published their paper in 2013, from 1993 to 2012. The global mean surface temperature rose at a rate of 0.14 degrees per decade And that rate had over a 95% confidence of absolute accuracy. So these were actual temperature readings and all this. It rose at 0.14 degrees centigrade, plus or minus 0.06, 1993 to 2012. This rate of warming, they wrote, is significantly slower than the climate models in phase 5 of the IPCC. In fact, the actual warming was less than half of the computer models. Or to put it clearly, the computer models had predicted there would be more than double the warming that actually occurred. It gets better. I think it's good enough. The inconsistency between observed and simulated global warming, the global models, patterns, computer models, is even more striking for temperature records from 1998 to 2012. So that'd be a 14-year period. For this period, the observed trend of 0.05 degrees plus or minus 0.08 per decade is 4 times smaller than the computer models. And what he's talking about here is the global warming in general. The comprehensive worldwide predicted global warming was overestimated 4 times than it actually occurred. Let that sink in. This is not insignificant. And they're like, we're not going to play crap. You can't lie about this shit. It's like your computer models are crap. They're way off the scale. They're not even close. A normal scientist would then adjust the computer model, you would think. Maybe our models are wrong. We're not. And what a lot of people don't realize too is the IPCC wouldn't include any research about anything else. What's called the oscillations of the ocean, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation, solar activity, cosmic rays, all these other climate factors. Oh no, we don't put them in the model. But what do you put in the model? Only CO2. So when we use our algorithm, love this, to do anything like adjusting temperatures or estimating temperatures, it's the one that has the CO2 formula in it. But that's not reality because the solar activity is very significant. The cosmic rays are very significant. All the electromagnetic field, all these other things are very significant. Yeah, no, we don't put them in. And it got so bad for the first time, I think it was 2016, the IPCC considered looking at maybe some solar activity. And we call that science. So, but my point is, you would think that would be good news. Oh my God, here we are in 2012. This is good news. The planet at the surface and the whole global warming thing is not warming up like we thought it was. You would think people would be excited. This is great. The worst thing about that is that, and this, I remember this was reported in the news because it's like, well, this is not a good deal because we now have centuries to deal, assuming even the CO2 is cooking and all that, we now have centuries to deal with this global warming, not just decades. Because see, even right now, the IPCC is reporting, if we don't change all of this, within 8 or 9 years, we're just going to hell in total catastrophe. It's all just going to burn up, and explode, and everything will just go into absolute degradation. Got 9 years to do it, you better get on it. Start getting rid of fossil fuels, reverse everything. No, they didn't like that. Centuries, because the rate's too slow. And I blame a lot of this on the media. We have some of the worst media reporting. It's not even journalism. People call it fake news. It's not. That's even too complimentary. It's just this extremely misguided. It's propaganda. We have an agenda. We have an idea. We have an opinion. And we're going to just make the story fit it. See what I mean? This alarmist mode is totally out of control. And of course it would be. We're in Pluto and Capricorn. It's this intense polarization to the max. But I'm telling you, since 2012, the leading climate scientists and leading astrophysicists and all this are noticing this. And they're paying attention and they're rising up against it. It's not easy. Like, again, you would not believe the number of professors that are fired and just knocked out for even suggesting the CO2 model is incorrect. It's worse than the Spanish Inquisition. It's the global warming Inquisition. And I'm telling you, always look out for these dates on any report you read. So I'm going to give you some examples. We could do it for 10 hours, but some examples just that I've experienced in terms of perhaps what you read needs to be re-examined every time you read it. So I'm going along, I hear this story in the media. Oh my God, Alaska, there's a town outside Alaska, a little east of Alaska, outside Juneau, in Juneau, Alaska. And it had, oh my God, the highest ever record-breaking, this is how the title went, the highest ever record-breaking apocalyptic temperature ever recorded. Because it can't just be a high temperature, it's got to be apocalyptic. It's the apocalypse, people. The highest ever record-breaking apocalyptic temperature. thinking, damn, that's bad. It's like maybe things are really getting worse. Because I didn't have this information about File, Gillett, and Zires and all this. I hadn't reached that point in my investigation. So I go to the NOAA website where they extracted this story. And sure enough, here's the NOAA website talking about it. And here's the high temperature, and here's Alaska, and it's going on and on and on with this boring, boring stuff most people wouldn't read. And I get to this one point, and they're saying, yes, and absolutely, this was the highest recorded temperature since 1925. Now, what you're supposed to learn by now is going, wait a minute, Jim said 1900. Said 1900. Always go back to at least 1900. So I'm reading this going, beep, beep, blink, 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 since 1925. That's so weird. Why would you stop or even look at 1925 as a temperature? Why would you even look? That's just so odd, just so weird. So I turn to my Google Home, as I like to call my FBI home. I always say, hi FBI, how are you doing? Listening in. And I go, okay Google, what was the highest temperature in Alaska from 1900 to 1925? And it instantly replies, in 1911, the highest temperature in Alaska was in this town. That was the topic of the article. And it was 4 degrees higher than this temperature. So the title of the article was, first of all, incorrect. It was not the highest ever recorded breaking temperature to begin with. That occurred in 1911. What a lot of people don't know, there was a humongous massive heat wave around 1911, and then we went into the Dust Bowl. And believe me, people have no idea how hot it was in the 20s and 30s. It was so unbelievably hot. When you look back through the newspapers and the temperature records, there were several days in the 30s where it was above 100 degrees from Canada to Mexico. And 3/4 of the whole United States to the East Coast was all above 100 degrees. It was friggin' hot. But where was the CO2? Oh, well, we didn't have the CO2 back then, because it didn't start rising until after World War II when we went industrial and built a bunch of machines. So how do you explain that? We don't. We just take the temperatures and we push them down. We just remember the trick. Push the past down, make the medieval period disappear, and push the 30s down. You got to push the temperatures down and raise the current temperatures so you get this slope. Got to get this slope going, right? Isn't that wild? So 1911, who would have guessed? The Australian wildfires, they really sucked last year, 2019 through 2020, the burn season, right? In Australia, those were massive fires, unbelievable fires, terrible fires, right? 46 million acres. That is a tremendous amount of destruction. Michael Mann, my favorite character. God love my Michael Mann. The FOI guy, just take out 30 years of data, delete your emails guy. Oh, and he was sued by 2 people. I mean, because you're going this forever, it's just a waste of time. He was sued by 2 people in the Canadian courts, and they've been going on. One has still been going now for 11 years. Hadn't come to a conclusion, because the Canadian courts are set this way. This other one was dismissed with the prejudice against Michael Mann. But in the court system, they asked him, well, we need your data. You need to show us your data. No, I'm not giving you my data. And the courts held him in contempt. No, I'm still not giving you my data. And they're like, this is not even your data. You work for a state. This is state research, state project, state money, state everything. It doesn't belong to you at all. No, he didn't give it up. Because you know why? They would discover if he gave it up. Yeah. And they already know this because someone actually hacked his FTP, the file transfer protocol, when you upload files on there. Oh, people are so good because they're so funky. Someone hacked in and got part of his FTP files. And that's how they discovered he had substituted the wood ring data. Remember, the chart was on wood ring data with temperature data at the end. See, and here's the trick. The Penn State, oh, they're fine, they did nothing wrong. If you made the whole thing temperature data, what would have occurred, you'd go in the past and it would go like this. Because the temperature data shows the big medieval period. See what I mean? Yeah, fraud, fake. That's what they claim, and I think they're right on that. So the media bias. Australia, 46 million acres destroyed. People think, that's terrible. Here's Michael Mann down there. Yeah, global warming. You little CO2 dogs pumping out your CO2 fossil fuel crap. You're just heating up the planet, and now you're burning Australia. Except for the fact, in everything I recommend, start at 1900 and also check the entire history. And I was never a history buff until recent times. It's like, oh, you can discover a lot of stuff by checking the history behind every story. Just check the whole history. Go back to 1974 and 75. Australia has natural cycles of massive wildfires. Just perfectly natural. 1974-75, you know how many acres burned? 290 million. 290 million. 46 million last year, The 70s, 74, 75, 290 million. And here's why. Because when you look at this temperature graph, here we are. Let's start at the little ice age down here, 1640. Very, very, very cold. Believe me, super cold. Starts warming up to the 1850s. Then we get into the 1900s, and it keeps going up like this. And this weird thing happened. Right after World War II, 45, 47, the temperature started dropping like this. Went up, temperature started coming down till 1979, and then it went boop and started warming up to the early 2000s. It's like, what is this weird thing? This from the 40s to the 70s. At that time, they were even thinking an ice age was coming. Richard Nixon had called for an assembly of scientists all over the world to watch out for the coming ice age. There was this really bizarre cold snap around the entire world from the 40s to 50s. We'll talk about that later, what caused that, and all this. And what Michael Mann doesn't understand, as many people don't, droughts are more associated with cold water. When you have cold water in the climate around things, cold water will cause more droughts than the warm environment. And guess what? How much excessive cold water, because the planet's been cooling since 2016, it's going to get a lot cooler. The planet's been cooling since 2016. There's this massive amount of cool water around Australia. That's all you got, nice research and all this cool water. And back in the see, this was 74 to 75. It was particularly cold in the 70s, right at this time where they lost 290 million acres because they had extreme drought, more than 2019 in Australia at that time. Not caused by global warming. People have this idea that global warming is just all heat and everything's going to dry out. Okay, remember the Paris heat wave last year, July 2019? I don't know, you ever see that Paris heat wave? Anyone? Okay. Oh my gosh. So it was in this massive heat wave in Paris, in France, July 2019. And people are like, it's a global warming again. We're just burning out. What happened is an equatorial vortex came up from the equator and this heat wave passed over Paris, okay? That heat wave was longer and stronger in 1911. More than today, longer and stronger in 1911. So when you look at the past, well, these things aren't supposed to be in the past. These massive heat waves aren't supposed to be in the past, so they are. And you will notice when we talk about the North Pole, the Arctic thinning, which is such a hot topic, you will notice almost all graphs will start the Arctic thinning from 1979. Now, why would they start in 1979? On most graphs that report on the Arctic thinning, because that was the end of that cold snap from 45 to 79. And the Arctic was the thickest at its point at the end of 79. So when you draw your graph from 79 to like 2012, oh my gosh, look how it's thinning. It's thinning. Well, the news, you go back to the 1924 and the Arctic had almost completely disappeared. Most glaciers had melted away in Greenland in the 20s and 30s. And how do you know this? Because there's the stories and the evidence and the reports and all this that are still in print today. You can find them on microfilm and everything online. Here are just the stories. There was this massive, it was the friggin' Dust Bowl. It was hot, you know, that 100 degrees, it was hot. It was super hot during the Dust Bowl time. And the Arctic had almost disappeared completely. Polar bears didn't. Arctic almost disappeared completely. Greenland was melting like crazy. They thought there may be no ice left on Greenland in a couple of decades. It was melting so fast. But then 45, boop, 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 okay? Now, too much is attributed to this man-made global warming. Recently in 2020, there's a local lake up in Canada, and it flooded. It was starting to rain heavily. And of course, we now contribute all cold and wet stuff to global warming also. They didn't do that initially, but since there's been an increase in cooling and rain, well, that's due to global warming. We've got a little story. So now you just can't win. If it's cold, global warming. If it's hot, global warming. If it's wet, global warming. If it's dry, global warming. That's a good gig to play, right? So this mayor of the town said, this is global warming, people. We're going to attribute this to global warming. No, it wasn't. The guy who administrated the lake didn't release it enough. They had overestimated the forecast, and they held the water back, and when it rained, not even excessively, it flooded the town. Lots, because don't think dry is global warming. Don't think heat is global warming. No, oh my gosh, it's just terrible. So my point is that climate alarmists are really bad at making predictions. We already know the most important point is that by 2010, 2011, it's very clear the climate warming models have been way overestimated and way inaccurate. We don't have hardly as much near anything to worry about global warming at this point. compared to the previous whole history, even though that shtick is being rolled and rolled and rolled and rolled again. You know what I mean? Just rolled and pumped that thing. And I was astonished. The IPCC, no, we're going to even jack that model up even higher. We're going to crank it up one more notch. And all these stories have come out in the last year and this year. It's like, oh my God, we're doomed in 8 years. We're doomed. No, we're not. We have actually centuries to deal with that. It's going to be a slow warming increase for the next 600 years. So there's a website called extinctionclock.org. And it's worth checking out. The word extinctionclock, CLOCK.org. Check it out. What this is predictions made by scientists, climate scientists, meteorologists, warming scientists, etc., environmental scientists, going all the way back to the 70s to look at the record of how this prediction goes. Okay? It's very important to appreciate this. And I didn't want to go back and forth, but I had to do this one for 1970. I'll just do it by the year. I had the month and the year, but I'll just do the year. 1970, Paul Ehrlich. Now, a lot of you might not remember Paul Ehrlich or know who he was. He was this big environmentalist back in the 70s. And this is what, and from Stanford University, and this is what he wrote. 1970, population will inevitably and completely outstrip whatever small increase in food supplies we make. The death rate in the United States of America will increase until at least 100 to 200 million people per year will starve to death in the next 10 years, which would have been 1980. Now, I may have been in a time warp or parallel universe, but I don't remember that happening. But we had 100 to 200 million people dying every year in the United States because we can't grow enough food for them, okay? 1970, Dr. Dillon Ripley, Secretary of the Smithsonian Institute, stated that in 25 years, between 75 and 80% of all the living animals will be extinct. That would have been 1995. Just checking again. Nope, didn't happen. 1972, I love this. The Arctic Ocean will be ice-free in the year 2000. That would have been what, 28 years later? 72. That wasn't the first of these massive predictions here on extinctionclock.org. One was made in 1957. There'd be no North Pole ice in the year 2000. But I checked, and it was still there, right? 1988. Now we're getting into it, because now the IPCC is formed, the global warming institutions are formed, the money's starting to flow in for research and everything. They just didn't expect it to be that much money. And working that good for them. September 1988. The Maldives Islands will be completely flooded within 30 years. Now, the Maldives are these beautiful little islands south of India, a little bit to the west, and they've got these beautiful hotels on them that sit above this really flat, sandy land and the ocean. They're just magnificent. But no, they're going to be gone in 2018. Surprisingly, they're still there, and nothing has water raised in their area at all. I'm just saying it's 2020. I'm just, 1988. This is also connected to the same story in 1988 about the Maldives Islands. From the Canberra Times, the end of the Maldives and its people could come sooner because drinking water supplies will dry up by 1992, as predicted. Didn't happen. 1989, UN predicts disaster if global warming is not stopped by the year 2000. From the AP Press, a senior UN environmental official says entire nations will be wiped off the face of the earth by sea levels if global warming is not stopped by the year 2000. No, it's still going up because the earth, by the way, is naturally warming at 0.5 to 0.6 degrees Celsius every 100 years, and that will continue for the next 600 years, by the way. That's due to solar activity. But surprisingly, those entire nations that were wiped out by sea level didn't occur. People aren't paying attention. In the year 2000, David Viner, a senior research scientist at the CRU University of East Anglia, one of those East Anglia people, this is in the year 2000. Within a few years, snowfall will become a very rare and exciting event. Children just aren't going to know what snow is, he said. Just going to know what snow is. Although what's interesting is global snowfall has increased since 2016. In fact, you're probably going to be completely unaware of how much it has increased over the entire planet, because you know what's not reported in any news? Cooling events. That's not exactly true, because this week, literally, saw an old story from CBS that the main ice sheet in Greenland, Glacier, that they report on, they had to report on it because that sucker is thickening and growing. And it was their main glacier reporting, look Look at the global warming. This thing is melting, 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 melting. It's lost over 2/3 of its size. It's melting. It's melting. Not for the last 3 years. It's growing, growing, growing. That's just an anomaly. You can't count that as climate, the reporter was saying. It's not, or the scientist. You can't. No, that's like weather. It has to be a large thing to be climate, which he's correct. You just can't count that. And they gave some total BS excuse about why this glacier was thickening. People, the planet is cooling. 2007 by Al Gore. There will be no snow on Mount Kilimanjaro by 2017. It still is, and it's 2020. 2007, Snowdon, Beacons, the Black Mountains, the Cambrian Mountains will be snow-free by 2020. These are Welsh mountains in the Welsh countryside. No, they're totally packed with snow 13 years later. 2007, Arctic will be ice-free by 2012. Also in 2007, another climate scientist. The Arctic summer ice-free, 2013. Nope, still have ice. 2008, it'll be free in 2008. Even in April of that year, they said by the end of this year, there'll be no ice at the North Pole. It'll be gone. No, it's not gone. May 2008, from the United Nations Environment Program. There will be 50 million climate refugees 2 years from now in 2010. Missed that story completely. I didn't see one climate refugee. 50 million? 2009, from the Future Earth. I love this one, 2009. That's not that long ago. That's 11 years ago. As water levels drop by 2017, that's 2020. By 2017, Hoover Dam will no longer be able to provide drinking water to Las Vegas, Tucson, and San Diego. It will stop generating electricity to Los Angeles, and if nothing is done by then, it will be a dry hole by 2020. I checked, I looked online, that sucker's full. Just saying, just saying. 2012, experts predict the Arctic ice will be gone within 4 years by 2016. 2013, Arctic Ocean to be ice-free by... The Arctic is not paying attention. I think we should have a committee, send some emails to the Arctic. It's like, dude, you've been told to melt for the last 20 years. You're not paying attention. July 2013, Arctic will be ice-free in 2 years by 2015 and will create a methane catastrophe. This is a story in The Guardian that, oh my God, when it melts, then this methane is going to be released and it'll catastrophically affect the rest of the world. Arctic is not paying attention. We have to talk to the Arctic. 2016, Arctic summers will be gone by 2017. Guess what? 2017, I love this one. This was in Montana. So in June of 2017, which is recently, because no one's been informed of the failure of the computer models of IPCC publicly. So in Montana, in the Glacier National Park, they put up these signs, and these signs said the small alpine glaciers present today started forming about 7,000 years ago. This is to educate the public. The small glaciers present today started forming 7,000 years ago and reached their maximum size around 1850 at the end of the Little Ice Age. They are now rapidly shrinking due to human-caused climate change. Your CO2, you're melting these Montana glaciers. You too, you're melting them. They'll be gone by the year 2020. Well, it's 2020 and they're absolutely not gone. And guess what? They had to remove all the signs this year. This is going to look bad when it's like 2023, 2024. You got a sign that says the glaciers went away in 2020, and no, these things right here, yeah, they're right in front of it. And so the last one here, 2019 from UCLA. The Arctic Ocean will be ice-free by 2044. Now this I like, because now they're smart. They're getting smart. Don't do this 3-4 year melt the ice thing. That's not going to work for you. Shoot out at least 25, 30 years so you get your pension, you get to retire. You know, just throw it out there where a lot of people won't be around. Won't be around 25 years from now. Isn't that hilarious? So what I'm saying is climate alarmism, fear of the environment, is fear, false evidence appearing real. The absolute reality is that surface temperature and the universal global temperature have barely increased, clearly up to 2012, and it's been cooling since then. Now, one more story. I love this. So, get some good news in this. Not all the media is alarmist. Well, most of it is. So when you look at these stories, you're going to recognize how absurd so many of them are. They're literally absurd. But the public is not aware of that. They'll just fight you to death. No, we're going to die. We're going to burn up, and our heads are going to explode in 8 years. And you won't get your hotel room on the Maldives. I don't care. Yes, I know it's there. The water hasn't risen at all around it. They got their drinking water, and it's 2020. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, but forget that. Forget those predictions. 2020 now, we can make better predictions. Yeah, more wild and violent for the next 8 years. But there's some good news. Even I will admit that some of the IPCC directors call it right. I'm not saying the IPCC is evil. They got caught up in the agenda of CO2 global warming. They just got caught up in the frenzy. They got caught up in the trap, and they almost turned it into religion. This climate denier thing is just, my God, I can only think of the scarlet A. You know, the old scarlet A, adultery. Now we got a scarlet D. You're a denier. Put the evil D on them. They are now classified as a denier. Oshavi, this young physicist, was doing research on solar activity contributing to climate change, and it was so good it's unbelievable. And he submitted it to the IPCC, and they informed him, we will not be looking at any research concerning solar activity. This was some good research. Carbon-14. See, what happens is cosmic rays always come into the solar system, but we have our magnetic shield that kind of blocks them. And when the magnetic shield reduces, the cosmic rays come in, and they increase clouds and all types of weather activity. People don't know this. They hit ions and they change things in the atmosphere, and they can cause massive cloud adjustment, cloud activity. And you can really track this very scientifically with carbon-14 research. And he did that and presented his paper, and it's astonishingly brilliant. No, we're not going to consider that. And of course they don't want to consider that. They don't want to consider many, many, many things, because it takes away from CO2 as the only driving force. That's not how the climate runs, people. That's not how the climate runs. Polar bears. Oh my God, our poor polar bears, right? They're starving. They're terrible. Poor polar bears. No, not really. So in 2018, 2 years ago, from the Canadian News, and I found this really, Canadians and Australians really don't like climate alarmists. I mean, they really don't like them a lot. And because in Canada, they have these really strict taxes for the climate, for CO2 global warming, very severe taxes. And they, in the year 2000, made these predictions for the next 15 years because of this nasty global warming that's attacking us all. Not a single prediction of these 12 predictions occurred. It was massive drought, massive crop failure, massive water failure, all this stuff. Not a single one of those things occurred. They're kind of pissed. Kind of pissed. Yeah, because you tax the hell out of us and all this. And the Australians, particularly, are the same way with the Canadians. But this is the CBC, Canadian News, and this is the story. Prior to a 2007 survey, that'd be 13 years ago, it was estimated there were about 880 polar bears in northern Labrador and northern Quebec region. Okay. However, a recent study actually found 2,152 animals, a significant increase over the earlier estimate. Researchers are now 2 years into a new study, and Goody, who was the researcher on this story, said word of mouth indicates the population is continuing to rebound and increase. He goes, I think our polar bear population is very, very healthy, he said. The Davis Strait polar bear population is probably one of the most healthy in Canada, certainly in the world. And Goody said, while there are a few different polar bear groups that are in trouble, and this is true because you want to be absolutely factual, the majority of polar bears are in great shape, and they have more than quadrupled their population in the last 30 years. Quadrupled. No, that ice is going to melt, they're going to fall in and drown, and there will be nothing to eat. That's, and then we'll show you National Geographic, this starving polar bear. Turned out that major picture they showed of this starving polar bear was a sick polar bear. It wasn't starving, it was sick. It's fraud, it's media fraud. So he said, despite that, most people have no idea. And from what he sees online, most people have no idea, and many seem to think that the polar bears are in trouble and in decline globally. They're not. Those suckers are expanding. They're having triplets in their breeding broods and all this. They're having triple babies. They're fat little pigs. Goody points to one post he saw from National Geographic that showed what appeared to be a starving polar bear, but in reality it was an animal that was sick when it was investigated. National Geographic. They've done a number of stories that are very misrepresenting. I don't like to call it fake news at all, but I say it's very inaccurate, very misrepresenting news. He goes, it's an easy story to put out there that polar bears are in massive trouble. Sometimes I have to bite my tongue or keep my fingers off the keyboard when I see these social media posts. So what's the story on polar bears? They're thriving. The Arctic was mostly gone around 1924. People have no idea. You look historically at the actual records, the North Pole was just melting like a maniac through the 20s. humongous amounts of Greenland were melting away. Major glaciers all over Greenland, all over North Canada. Polar bears survived because they've been around forever. With the recent slight warming, the buffet is huge. And what I mean by that, see, people don't take into account, no, they got to have their ice. They got to get their little seals. So it's slightly warmed up in the North Pole. No big deal. The population of the seals and little animals have more than quadrupled. The polar bears have a buffet going, a massive buffet. They're pigging out. They're doing fine. Yes, they have to relocate in some areas, but they spend about 20%, 30% more time on land, but they're pigging out. And the Inuits and the natives of Canada are complaining about the size of the polar bears getting too large, and they're attacking humans in villages. But the laws don't let them shoot but a very limited number of polar bears, and they go, this shit has got to stop because we're being killed by this massive number of increase of polar bears, and they need to be maintained. No, you're still going to see, oh God, I saw last year a polar bear be a story of just a starving polar bear on a little chunk of ice. That little chunk of ice is going to break and he's going to drown and he's starving. That's a total misrepresentation. So, to recap, with all this babbling I've been doing on this climatology, this was from a little climate scientist recap. So you know historically, so remember now, we got our modern age, and as you go back 1350 to 1850, you got that first cold snap, warms up 1,000 years ago in the Middle Age hump. In fact, as you came towards 1350, cathedrals in Europe, all over Europe, are abandoned. They're working on these huge, beautiful cathedrals they built. They literally dropped their tools and had to go home to grow food because it was starting to cool off. They just stopped the work. So warm periods are times of thriving, like the Roman period in the Middle Age, but they're times of thriving and great production in food. The CO2, I'm glad we got this extra CO2. Plants on the planet are more than 400%, growing more than 400% stronger than normal. Never forget, plants drink CO2, absorb CO2. The forest, the rainforest and all this, they're going green like crazy. So you go back 900 to 500 was that first dark ages. Then you got the warm period, then it goes bumpy to 8,000 years ago. And we're not too far from hitting that ice age coming up. So the little ice age, following the historically warm temperatures of the Middle Age warm period, the little ice age lasted from about, the medieval warm period was 950 to 1350. Then the little ice age came along, and it's been attributed to natural cycles in solar activity, particularly sunspots. Because in Al Gore's model, I love that original movie that he did. What was it called? Something bullshit something. But I mean, Al Gore's movie, Inconvenient Truth. It is now banned in a number, not banned, but structured in a great number of European countries that if that film is shown, they have to give 11 disclaimers before of 11 major inaccuracies in the film itself before they show it to school children or college, university level, and all this. So we have, sunspots. See, so here's the sun, comes into Earth, and then it traps it in the greenhouse and we warm up. Right, that was the premise. Traps it in the greenhouse and we warm up. That's how he explained it. But no one stopped and asked the question, Mr. Gore, what if the sun cools off? What if the sun warms up? Because you're assuming solar constant. And guess who assumes the sun never changes? IPCC. No, the sun's a constant, never changes. It's constant sun, constant radiation, constant heat, constant light. No, in our models, it doesn't change at all. It's what we call the solar constant. That's not even reality. So if the sun cools off, we cool off. So what happened in that 1350, this is what he's describing here, 1350 to 1850, was the sun was going through sunspot reduction, which is going through right now. And as the sunspots reduce, as you'll see here, so the first lower sunspot activity was the Wolf minimum. They call them solar minimums. 1280 persisted for 70 years till 1350. That was followed by a period of even lower sunspot activity, 90 years from 1460 to 1550, called the Spore minimum. Then the period of 1640 to 1710 was the low point of the Little Ice Age. The number of sunspots declined to 0 that entire time. There were no sunspots from 1640 to 1710 at all. And when there's no sunspots, the sun just literally cools off, right? This is known as the Monder Minimum. Okay, named after the astronomer Walter Monder. That was followed by the Dalton Minimum from 1790 to 1830, another period of below normal sunspot activity. And I do like to point out, George Washington, when he crossed the Delaware, was pushing something out of the way in the paintings. Yeah, little icebergs, little huge chunks of ice, because it was colder and crap back then in the 1770s. You could walk across the Delaware many times during the winter. And in fact, in the late 1770s and even the early 1800s, you could walk from what is now Manhattan to Staten Island all winter long because the entire area is frozen over solid. It's not frozen over now, yeah, because we warmed up. Because see, 1350, 1850, and we warmed up to our current modern time. So in 1816, Google this, people. In 1816, we have the year with no summer in the United States of America. People, what do you mean the year with no summer? 1860 was the year with no summer. Now, not here in Oklahoma, Texas, Arizona, because we're in the hot Southwest, California, we're in this hotter zone. Up here in the Northeast, where the polar vortex is, it's much cooler. But in 1816, a huge volcano erupted in the southern hemisphere. Ashes went out, cooled off the planet so much that in the entire Northeast United States, they had no summer. It sleeted, cold rain, snowed. Sleeted, cold rain, snowed, all summer long. Zero with no summer. And it took about 2 years to totally recover to get the crops up. And the climate scientists will go, oh no, see, volcanoes, they haven't, oh see, you're just full of, what is a volcano thing? It's that's not climate change. Yes, it is. A true climate scientist says, what affects the climate? What's going on to produce these changes? A true scientist says that. If you're a pseudo-scientist, no, CO2 and everything else we're just going to ignore. Like that dude Chaviv's reports, we're not, nope, we have no intention to include them into our report at this time. We're just going to ignore him. That's how you handle that, just ignore him. So get ready for this. During these cold snaps, 500, 900, 1350 to 1850, 80% of all major earthquakes and volcanoes occur during the cold snaps. And it's what I like to tell my friends who are just not into this. That's what we call a fact, because you can look it up and just see when the earthquake occurred, when the volcano occurred, and how big the earthquake was and how strong the volcano was. 80% of all major volcanoes and earthquakes occur during the cold snaps, making them worse. Making them worse. Because see, when ash rises above 30,000 feet, if a volcano erupts and only goes to 30,000 feet, not a big deal, then it comes down, right? But if it goes above 30,000 feet, it will cover the entire planet. And recently, in the last 2 years, people have been noticing that sunsets all over the world have this weird purple tinge and sometimes a yellow band on the horizon. And the geologists go, yeah, that's right, because these volcanoes are erupting now above 30,000 feet, and that's volcanic ash that's going around the entire planet. Isn't that interesting? And they, oh, it's a scientific fact and all this. But what people don't recognize is 2019, we had more volcanoes erupt in 2019 that went above 30,000 feet than the last 75 years. Because I haven't mentioned the other fun part of this climate stuff. We're entering a cold snap, and the Earth is naturally warming at the same time. My friend goes, you can't say we're entering a cold snap and the Earth is warming naturally at the same time. Yeah, you can, because I just said it. We're entering a cold snap, and the Earth is warming at the same time. So the increase in global temperature since the late 19th century, the 1800s, just reflects the end of the Ice Age. So the global temperature trends since then have followed not CO2, but the ocean temperature cycles of what they call the Pacific Decadal Oscillation and the Atlantic Multidecadal Oscillation, what they call PDO and AMO. And what this is every 20 to 30 years, the oceans will turn over. And the cold on the bottom comes to the top, chills you out. Then when it finally warms, then it keeps going back and forth, okay? The warming then continues to slightly warmer global temperatures until the next turning cycle. All right, those ocean temperature cycles and the continued recovery from the Little Ice Age are the primary reason why global temperatures rose from 1915 to 1945. And it's really 1900. So as we're coming out of the Ice Age, we're going up here to 1945 because of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation was warming, and it was really friggin' warm from 1900 to 1945. So warm, there's no explanation in the IPCC models at all for this warming period. There is no CO2 to cause this. There are no other factors. There's no explanation for cause this, but this. And that's so, here's the weird part. 1945, bleep, bleep, started going down to 1979 because the oceans flipped over to the cool side. And that was the primary reason. It was so cold from 1945 to 1979 compared to the standard temperature. When you look back on the records and you read the newspapers and the Life magazine and Time magazine, people are thinking, oh my God, an ice age is coming. We're going into an ice age. We got to prepare for this kaleidoscopic ice age. It's coming. And like I said, Nixon compiled a panel from the world, and Russia was concerned about this ice age. And the glaciers were growing. It was getting cold everywhere. 1979, click, click, the oceans flipped over again, warmed up from 79 to past the year 2000, okay? Why climate scientists lower the past temperatures? Because the CO2 model doesn't work. 1990, 1945 is an embarrassment to them. So, this is back to the 1990s, but that warming ended, and the global the hiatus, because they call this, see, so at the year 2001, the Earth started cooling. It was still warming, but it was, what's happening? It's like pausing. This global warming is like hanging out, it's pausing. They call it the hiatus in climate science. There was a hiatus, there was a pause. It's like, why is this pause here? It's due to the ocean shifting thing and the fact that CO2 doesn't drive it like people see. As the Economist magazine reported, the world added over 100 billion tons of carbon to the atmosphere between 2000 and 2010. That was 1/4 of the entire history of the carbon we added. Back to the 1750s, 1/4 of the entire amount was released 2000 to 2010. And you know what didn't warm up? The atmosphere. The CO2 greenhouse effect. No, that just didn't appear. That's why there's such a thing in 2010 when this was shown. Your models don't even work. All right, so at the first current stall around 2000, the global warming was due to the ocean cycles turning back to cold, cooling off, but something else developed over that period, and it was the solar cycles. The sun goes through an 11-year solar cycle period, okay? Sunspots run in 11-year short-term cycles with longer cycle trends of 90, 200 years, and the number of sunspots declined substantially in the last 11-year cycle, which was 23, and after flattening out over the previous 20 years, but in the current cycle, which is, they're talking about here 24, the sunspot activity has just collapsed. The sun's changing massively right now. And in the NASA Science News Report for 2013 stated, indeed, the sun could be on the threshold of a mini Monder Minimum event. What's the Monder Minimum? When it's called the global GSM, Grand Solar Minimum. Back in that little ice age, there were no sunspots on the sun for 70 years. Because they could count them back then. They could look at the sun, they could count them. There were no sunspots. It got so cold, the River Thames in London, you know where Big Ben is? That thing froze over solid all winter long. People went out and built houses and party festival buildings on it, and they cut through the ice and fished all winter long. It never unfroze. It's friggin' cold, trust me. It was very cold around the whole planet. This is important. So the ongoing cycle, which is 24, is the weakest in more than 50 years. And I love how they write this in the NASA Science News Report. Moreover, there is controversial evidence of a long-term weakening trend in the magnetic field strength of sunspots. And Matt Penn and Peterson Livingston of the NSO Observatory predict that by the time cycle 25 arrives, which is this year 2020, it's the beginning of an 11-year cycle, magnetic fields on the sun will be so weak that it's possible that no sunspots will be formed. Okay? Independent lines of research involving helioseismology and polar fields tend to support this conclusion. Now, I love controversial my ass. It's not controversial. The peak, you look at the peaks of the solar activity, they've been doing this for quite some time. They're on the way to reduction because we're about to approach another what's called grand solar minimum, that unusual time, hundreds of years apart, where the sun completely slows down. I mean, significantly cools off. So what do you think happens when the sun cools off? We cool off, okay? So enter the grand solar minimum. The grand solar minimum, like I said, is when the activities of the sun goes through its natural cycles of cooling and warming, which it does on these little short 11-year cycles, but they grew up in the 90s in larger cycles and they really come together, okay? NASA and IPCC have already made the adamant statement that this cooling period that we've entered in 2020 will have no significance whatsoever. It will do almost nothing to the climate or nothing. Don't worry about it, do almost nothing. That's because they have virtually no understanding of the sun or how the universe operates, is my opinion. So from 2020 to 2055, which is 35, but technically it's actually, and they always say this 2020, 2055, but it's technically 2020 to 2053, because it's 3 11s. See, it's 3 11-year cycles. several major researchers here. John Casey, C-A-S-E-Y, and he wrote the book Dark Winter, and I would recommend people listening research him. David Dilley, that's spelled D-I-L-L-E-Y. Piers Corbyn, P-I-E-R-S-C-O-R-B-Y-N, British climatologist. And my favorite, Valentina Zarkova, Russian scientist genius. And there are many people now writing about have you heard of the grand solar minimum? No. No. But dudes, it's here. Check this out for a side topic. So they're maintaining we're going to experience a grand solar minimum, a calming down of the sun, and a very, very notable cooling on the planet, as in very. Now, there's big debate, and there's just like there's global alarmists, there's cooling alarmists too, because you gotta love people, because people are just people. But John Casey, Piers Corbyn, and others go, no, this is where the global cooling is going to hit the fan. There's going to be significant cooling, massive loss of food throughout the entire world, massive starvation, massive destruction of things, and that little thing about those earthquakes and volcanoes. Well, see, it technically started 2018. The cooling cycle technically started 2018, and last year, 2019, for the first time in, what did I say, 75 years, we had more volcanoes erupt around the globe and go above 30,000 feet than in the last 75 years. It's just going to increase. So we don't like to make predictions, but I'm going to throw one out. You're going to see a truckload of increased volcano and earthquake activity over the next 10 years. And not small, significant. From, not global warming, because you know the global alarmists will go, that's due to global warming. That's why we have more earthquakes, volcanoes. It's from global cooling. And you notice the jet stream is going crazy, or maybe not, you didn't know that. As the sun decreases its energy, it's so electromagnetically tied to the Earth that it disrupts the entire electromagnetic field of the Earth. And the jet belt, which goes around the planet, it's normally pretty flat and hangs around the top. It's going like this now. And it's been going like this evermore for like about the last 8 years. Actually 4 years, very strong since 2016. That's why you have the polar vortex and the equatorial vortex, because things follow the jet stream. And from the equator, it literally blistered up like this. You know, the polar vortex came down in Chicago and New York, and they go, oh, the polar vortex, see the jet stream dipped down, and we got all that Arctic cold, excuse me, on New York City. You can do it from the equator too. And that's exactly what happened with Paris. A huge hot spot erupted like a blister over Europe because the jet stream is getting all messed up from this solar electromagnetic thing. And the cosmic rays, even on the NASA website, they indicated, we are surprised at how much the cosmic X-ray radiation has increased recently. Well, the global cooling people aren't, the grand solar minimum. And so I'm just telling you, there are some fanatics on the grand solar minimum, and they're thinking they're saying, go get your greenhouse now. You'll want your greenhouse now because the food supply is going to get knocked through the roof, as in not available at all. We'll have to see. So, John Casey, he's a former NASA scientist, so his book Dark Winter and related books. So check it out, Grand Solar Minimum. David Dilley is an interesting guy. He studies just cycles, which is weird, just cycles of the moon, cycles, gravitational cycles, electromagnetic cycles, all these cycles. And Piers Corbyn is a climatologist, and he's this, looks like a mad scientist in London. And he's a crazy guy. But Piers Corbyn is really, really fun, and he's explaining all this stuff. And Piers Corbyn used to, and David Dilley both, they do long-range prediction of big climate and weather events 2, 3, 4 years out. You'll love this, especially hurricanes and stuff like that. And Piers Corbyn and David Dilley have an accuracy rate of 85%. Well, it's not 100, Jim. No, it's 85%. You know what the rate of the National Hurricane Center is? Under 40. National Hurricane Center can only predict accurately slightly above 40% accuracy on their hurricane predictions. So what are these two dudes doing here at 85%? How are they pulling that crap off? Because they're taking into account solar activity, electromagnetic activity, all these cycles and all this. But my favorite little girl here, Valentina Zarkova, a professor in mathematics at Northumbria University, professor in applied mathematics, professor in astronomy, and a PhD in astrophysics. We like Valentina because she talks like a Russian. I will give you a lecture here. What I love about Valentina is she'll go, and the cross-diurnal passion biology thing with the math thing, and then she'll stop and then tell you what it means. It's a great lecture. So she was giving a lecture, so she studies the sun and the electromagnetic fields of the sun. all these other climatologists go, weather is driven by natural forces, and predominantly solar activity is the major contributor to climate variation and change. Our sun is the major contributor. There's fields, gravity fields, and the moon and all this are factors too, but the main is the solar activity. IPCC said, no. This is called, we don't even consider it. We don't even put it in our formula, right? So they're doing all, and but they have an accuracy above 85%. Where did that come from? Just saying. I mean, I remember one year Piers Corbyn said, these 3 areas of Russia will have floods, this area of Pakistan will have a drought, and this area of Europe will have this. And it did. And he had predicted it years before. And they're like, how do you do this? It's just because the solar activity. So, her brilliant theories on the electromagnetic activities of the sun were confirmed after she's a brilliant mathematician, so she did this mathematical model of the electromagnetic structure of the sun, multiple contrasting layers that she says now are even quadruple, and 2 years later, NASA satellites confirmed her mathematical formula is 100% accurate. She's so friggin' brilliant, this woman. And I saw this lecture she was giving to these men, and you gotta love people, because this one dude of scientists, they were like, oh, we've never seen that. I've never seen that before. And she's like, look at the, why, are you stupid? No, she didn't say that, but she was thinking that, you stupid. And I love this one scientist, he goes, yeah, but you're a woman. Wow. Wow. Wow is all I can say. Wow. So she's discussing this, so she got this brilliant, all research and all this. Her mathematical models are even more advanced since then. She states though, she knows her stuff, she states the coming grand solar minimum, which we're going to call the modern minimum, like the Monder Minimum, we're going to call this the modern minimum, will be half the size of the one from 1640 to 1710. That's what she states. God, and when she talks about the sun, it's like, woman, you know way too much. And it will last about half the time, approximately 2020 to 2055. But technically, it's actually 53. 3 11-year cycles. But she says it'll be half shorter in time, which is half the time of that one, and not quite as strong. But she goes, but you will notice it. You will notice it. She goes, and I am not a climatologist, and I'm not even going to discuss this with you, but here's the deal. You come back in 4 years later, 2024, then we talk. You just wait. It starts 2020, then you come back 4 years later, then we talk. Then we see what our discussion is like, right? So while she's doing all this incredible, unbelievable research, she accidentally discovered something about the climate that should have been worldwide news. And it's not. And it has an even better interesting twist. That's what's called the SIM, the solar inertial motion. Now, what do you mean, Jim? Solar inertial motion, SIM. The sun does not sit at the center of the solar system. Well, yeah, it's at the center, it sits right at the center. No, it moves around the barycenter. In other words, the sun's here, and these planets like Jupiter, Saturn come around and they pull the sun, and it's not exactly at the center of the solar system. It wobbles like a Rosetta pattern, like this, like little tiny spirals around the center because it's pulled by the planets. Well, what's the deal on that? She discovered, as she went through historical records, and this discovery of her work on the sun, because she's an astrophysicist, mathematician, and everything else, that there's this absolute repeating cycle. And as she put it in the lecture, you may discuss my other research, but this, you have no argument. It's 100% verified. And no one said anything. So they're looking at her models and things like, she was showing in the graphs like, yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. So this weird, what does this weird wobble do? Well, so here we have the sun, here we have the earth. And people think we understand the seasons. But it's not what people think, because people think, well, in the summer, we're closer to the sun. That's why we warm up. And because the earth goes around the sun, and in the winter, we're further away, because we don't have a perfect orbit. No, that's not how we do this. The reason we're warmer, the northern hemisphere, in summer is because the earth tilts towards the sun. You know, we have that axis of tilt. And when we tilt towards the sun, we get more radiation and energy, and we're warmer. And when it moves around here, we tilt away from the sun. And so the south hemisphere gets the energy, we don't. The weird part is, in summer, which is over here, when we tilt towards the sun and we're warmer, we're actually further away from the sun. And in winter, when we're tilted away from the sun, we're actually closer to the sun. But just that 96 million miles, just a tilt. Just a tilt. Warm versus very cold. Just a tilt. That blows my mind. 96 million miles. And at the equinoxes, it's equal. You know, either side doesn't matter, right? So she realized, this is about a 2,600 year cycle, but as she went through history, she just blew her mind. No one had discovered this. The sun is not always as close to the earth all the time. Because of the wobble, it's one time the most close and at another time the furthest away. And she goes, oh my God, this explains these Roman period, Minoan period, Holocene periods, these bumps. Yes, you go back to the past, it goes way 8,000 years ago, way here, very hot. But what are these little bumps? What are these bumps from? They're from this solar inertial motion, where the sun, being closer to the earth, warms it up. So the sun is approaching the earth right now on this solar inertial motion. And she states very clearly, it will reach its peak 600 years from now. And we're currently warming 0.5 degrees centigrade to 0.6 degrees centigrade per every century, every 100 years. And we're moving back to almost the Roman time period. Why? Because these little bumps, as we go back 8,000 years, these little bumps keep coming down. Why? Because over here, we're entering glaciers again. And during this 12,000, 14,000 year interglacial warming period, you start off warm and you start cooling off. So we've been cooling off since 8,000 years ago, right? And so she says, expect the Earth to heat up more than 2.5 degrees Celsius in the next 600 years. Now that's global temperature, which is different. That's a lot of heating, a lot of heating. But she goes, it's going to take 600 years to do this. It's not going to be overnight. So you'll have time to deal with it. And as she pointed out, hey, the Romans survived, you can survive too. In fact, the Romans thrived. Populating the planet, all this. But we're moving in this natural heating wave to peak out 600 years from now. And she pointed out about 300 years from now, there's going to be another cold snap. So one of the other main reasons, due to solar activity, we've been warming out of the little ice ages. We're approaching the next Roman time period. Approaching it very slowly because the sun is very slowly moving closer to the earth during this time. Isn't that amazing? So we are literally cooling off and warming at the same time. That's my point. Everyone's like, you can't say that. Yes, you can. Because we're about to enter this little modern minimum thing with the sun, the grand solar minimum, where we're going to have no sunspots. And no one knows exactly how much cool. Now, Valentina goes, I'm not a climatologist, so you can play with the figures. She goes, but I will say this, you're going to notice it. That's all she said. You'll notice it. It won't be unapparent. You're going to notice this cold snap here. Half as strong, though, as the Monder Minimum. And she goes, we're kind of lucky because we entered it kind of warmish. Because see, when they entered the Monder Minimum, they were already coming off the medieval period, and they had those few little sunspots before, and they were kind of like pre-cooled a little. So when they hit that 70-year time period, they were already kind of pre-cooled. So we're kind of lucky because we're going, we weren't going back to the Roman period at that time. We're coming off the Roman period. But when you come to this side, we're coming back to that next Roman warm period thing. So she goes, you're kind of lucky because we got a little warm here. She goes, but yeah, you're going to notice it. Well, see, the global cooling people, there's climate alarmists there too, and they think, oh, the shit's going to hit the fan, to put it bluntly. They think there's going to be unbelievable loss of food and crop throughout the world and really damaging stuff. And I hope they're wrong. I just hope it's enough to get everyone's attention. It's like, see, climate doesn't run on your one CO2 model, your one point. So all this other solar activity. Isn't that amazing? So what's my point of all this climate stuff? The fact of the climate change is this. Climate changes naturally by many complex processes. By many complex processes, right? Solar activity being one of the main ones. Even Shaviv admitted that. Solar activity is one of the main ones for very many reasons. And the CO2, yes, we warm from CO2 not significantly at all, is our point. Not significantly at all. It's a very minor factor, not even worth being concerned about. And people are so bizarre with, I hate fossil fuels, I just hate fossil fuels. I hate the oil company, right? Just destroy the oil company. And I go, well, you know, it's kind of stupid. And the reason that's kind of stupid is because we need fuel, we need energy, and that's what we have now technologically. And that fossil fuels built our entire world, our entire modern world. So yeah, do I want to move away from fossil fuels? Yeah, because I'm an environmentalist. I want a clean water, clean environment. I don't want 8 billion tons of plastic in the world that we have right now, which gives 1 ton of plastic to each person on the planet. We all get 1 ton of plastic. And we literally have made 8 billion tons of plastic, and most of it's in the environment. We used it and discarded it. It's like, that's not very good from an environmental standpoint. And people, yeah, but we need alternate energies. And I have a big surprise about alternate energies here in 1 second. Yes, I'm for that. I'm for moving to the future. And as I always say, we're going to move to the future. It's going to be great. It's going to be good. It's going to improve all the time, but just not next week. And we don't want to move to the future in a stupid way either. We want to move to the future in a sensible way because, well, we need our alternate renewable energy things. Well, I agree with you, but there's a really funny thing going on. Climate change and environmentalism. So climate change is the change in the background, just climate. Environmentalism is how do we treat our environment with pollution and poisons and all this. Windmills and solar panels are very toxic to the environment. And this issue is coming up this year. Why is it coming up this year? Because the solar panels are reaching an aging point, and the windmills, they need to be disposed of. It turns out, yes, from not generating CO2, which we realize we don't give a shit about now, not generating CO2, windmills, in the making of windmills and the disposing of windmills, they're very dirty and toxic to the environment, and solar panels are way worse. And nations now are discussing what the hell are we going to do with all these broken used solar panels that are extremely toxic to the environment. So climate change wise, yeah, they were great. Free wind, free electricity from the sun. Environmentally, no, it's a whole nother game. But see, most people aren't holistically thinking. That's why you want to be holistically thinking, all the angles, all the degrees, all the things figuring in. And the IPCC model is perfect on this. It's totally anti-holistic. And what do I mean by that? CO2 only, nothing else. We're not even, no, Shabib, I don't care if you scientifically proven this. We're not even going to look. We're not even going to review your paper. They actually told him, yeah, so we can't deny you from submitting your papers, but we can tell you we're not even going to look at them. Scientists, excuse me, that's the difference. So that is my point on that. So that's the status of the climate. A little bit different, isn't it? A little bit, yeah, I didn't know about this, what's this cooling thing? That 2020, 2053 thing, really? Yeah, just wait and see, that's all I'm saying. Just wait and see. You'll live long enough, we'll see it. Like Valentino said, give me about 4 years, 2024, and then we can have this talk again. See, because they don't have time for this. Most people don't research the news around the world. There's been such a massive increase in snowfall all over the world. It's not even funny. I mean, massively for the last 3 years. It's been growing and growing and growing and growing. There's areas of Japan, they haven't had snow in 100 years. They had 10 feet this year. Norway, Sweden, one of those, had the coldest summer in the last 68 years, this year. No, it's heating because California's burning, the fire thing. I don't love that even California thing. That all sucks, but that's the normal history of California. They have those fires all the time historically. They were caused predominantly by lightning strikes, and the one before, because I have family that lives in Napa Valley and all that. They're very, very familiar with that. They went through it. The California government does not allow them to do clearing anymore. They can't do clearing of the shrub. No, it's against the environment. There's like smart environmentalism and stupid environmentalism. That's stupid environmentalism. Well, we'll just burn it out. So, another phase, cosmology, which is tied right into this. Cosmology, the study of the solar sun, the planets, the solar system, the galaxies. Cosmology, just like the climate thing, has gone through this disruptive changes literally in the last 20 years. Literally. You say, well, who cares? And I understand why. This is why I didn't bring these two. The climate thing would have taken too much explanation because there's too much details in there, and that last talk I gave. The cosmology, though, from the standpoint of most people don't care about cosmology. They don't care about the sun, the planets, the solar system, the galaxies. They're not into that because it does not personally affect their personal life. I don't care if the galaxy's been this way or this way, who cares? But it's the universe in which we live, and it is an important factor. The cosmology of the sun, planets has changed so much in the last 20 years, it's beyond belief. And this brings us to the electric universe, because the standard models of cosmology, we have the sun, the planets, the solar systems, the galaxies, and everything's driven by gravity and volcanic action on the planets. Like the satellite Io is the most volcanic actively moon in our solar system. Io orbits around Jupiter. That's all been shown to be so wrong with the new emergent model of cosmology, which is the electric universe. And I recommend anyone who wants to study this go to YouTube and look up the Thunderbolts Project and the electric universe. There are thousands of videos on this that are beyond imagination, Thornhill and all the others. The universe is primarily driven electrically. That's the radical model. And things have changed so much it's beyond belief. 1999, dude was writing a paper in NASA about magnetic fields. Magnetic fields virtually do not exist in the universe, and there's no sign of them, and they are not important. 2020, the exact opposite has been found to be true. There's nothing but magnetic fields everywhere. Magnetic fields can only be produced with an electrical current. So the story of the electric universe is this: electricity, electromagnetic energy, is the primary driving force for all activity in the entire cosmos, even down to the subatomic level and molecular level. And so when you study this way too much longer, other than I'll just send you to it, the solar system, see, was supposed to have been created when we had this, remember, disk of particles, and then gravity pulled it together, and then gravity clumped the planets, and then gravity clumped all the little things, then we had the Oort belt and all this. No, that model is completely wrong. But here's what I love about astrophysicists. They tend to be real scientists, because when they discovered this in the last 20 years, they're like, oh my God, everything we thought about this was wrong. This is shocking, this is stunning. They sent particularly 2 satellites to Saturn and Jupiter in the last 15 years, Cassini and Juno. And when Juno got to Jupiter, I love this, one of the head scientists at NASA said, I can clearly state everything we thought we knew about Jupiter is completely wrong. This is completely wrong, entirely, completely. It's all wrong what we discovered. And what they discovered with these satellites is they got to Saturn and Jupiter that these huge electromagnetic ropes, which are called Birkeland currents, from Mr. Birkeland like over 100 years ago, that they ignored him. Birkeland said, the universe is electrically driven. And that's because plasma is everywhere, because people think that there's only 3 states of matter: solid, liquid, gas. No, there's 4 states of matter. There's solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. And this will blow your mind. 99.99% of the matter of the universe is plasma. There's almost no gas, liquid, or solids as part of the universe. That's the most trivial amount. Virtually all the matter of the universe is plasma, which is the single greatest conductor for the electrical currents. And when they looked out with the Hubble telescope and all this, and I'll give the scientists credit, they got great instruments. You said, if you've seen pictures of the galaxy, they're filaments, 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 filaments. They have found these Birkeland currents connecting clusters of galaxies 10 million light years apart. And these Birkeland currents that run everywhere pinch down. That's how stars are formed. They pinch down in all these plasma formations and create the stars. Because what the sun is a channel for electrical currents. Now the old model says, no, it's this solid core and it's got all this stuff going, and it's nuclear fusion of the hydrogen inside. See, it's a fusion machine. Yes, hydrogen fusion occurs on the sun, but not in the way people think. Here's the sun. It sends out these humongous Birkeland currents, which are 2 currents of electricity that twine and produce a magnetic field around them. And they connect to the north and south pole of each planet. And from the planet, it sends out Birkeland currents that connect to the north and south pole of each moon. And this is how the whole solar system is run. All the planets, all the moons. So when they went to Saturn the first time, they saw on some of the moons of Saturn these little spouts coming out of the south pole. Oh, those are volcanoes. That's weird. That volcanic activity shouldn't be there, though. That's kind of weird. And Io is so volcanic. It's just all these jets and all these, it's volcano things, but the temperature doesn't match and all this stuff doesn't match. That's electrical activity. They discovered these Birkeland currents were coming to the moon, and they shoot out through the south pole. Those are electric arcs shooting out, not volcanoes at all. And it explains so much. They discovered the magnetic field of Jupiter was so huge that if you could see magnetic fields in the sky, it'd be like you took like 3 basketball sizes and held them up like this. That's how big the magnetic field of Jupiter would be seen from Earth. The magnetic field is so vast, and everything they discovered was wrong. But my favorite, the proof of the electric universe. See, so here's the sun. The sun is connected outside the solar system to Birkeland currents. And they even know where they come from, the Orion belt. So from the Orion belt area, these Birkeland currents come into the sun to feed the solar system, and the energy goes from the sun out to each planet. Now, why is this significant? It's a big significance. So here's the sun. It's an electric transmitter. But when you looked at the sun, they've always thought, this is weird. It kind of doesn't, like pretty much everything else we thought about the solar system, doesn't work to what we think our models should work, because when you get to the photosphere of the sun, the top layer of the sun, it's 6,000 degrees. And the chromosphere above that is like 10,000 degrees. And then the corona is 1,000,000 degrees. But then 2 sun widths away on the outside of the corona, it's like 20 million degrees. And it's like, that's kind of weird because it's not what it should be. It's opposite. How does it get stronger the way, because it goes away further? No, that's exactly how plasma works. That's exactly how electrical fields work. So they created, so the long story of that, so I'm just saying, so the Birkeland currents were predicted in 1908 by physicist Christian Birkeland, who went to the Arctic Circle, and the aurora borealis, you think, oh, the little things. No, the aurora borealis are multiple circles of counter-rotating tubes of electricity. And if you see from the side, what you're looking at is the side of a column of energy that goes in the North and South Pole. And so we're going to do this little trick here. Well, I still got my connection. So people go to Earth, EARTH, .nullschool, Null, then the word school, SCHOOL.net, nullschool.net, and you will see this beautiful illustration. Oh, I think they can see it. Yeah. See, this is the planet Earth, and you can rotate this planet all around, and when you put it on the South Pole, because I'm showing, that's the Antarctic. You can see all those little hurricane-shapy things, because that's the wind at the surface level. So when you get there, you want to tap on the word Earth in the lower left-hand corner, and then it pulls up the menu, and right here where it says height, go all the way to the right and press on this 10 HPA. And the 10 HPA is going to show you, and then you can hit Earth again to collapse the menu. It's going to show you the outer upper edge of the atmosphere. And what you will discover is something amazing. This humongous circling energy of wind on the southern hemisphere. Funky, isn't it? This was only discovered in the last 5 or 6 years when they were researching Birkeland currents. And if you go to the North Pole, oh, I enlarged it, very good. If you go to the North Pole, it'll be opposite that. And notice this is twisting, we call that clockwise. Now here's how this works. So the Birkeland currents come from the sun into both poles of the Earth. And right now we're summertime, which means we're further away from the sun. We're not close to the sun, we're further away. We're lacking in energy. So when you do this with your right hand, take your right hand, point your thumb up, showing the direction of electric current, and see how your fingers curl this way? They curl this way. So if energy is going into the Earth, it goes this way. See how my fingers curl? My fingers curl clockwise, looking down into the Earth. And that's the direction this is going, which means energy is coming into the Earth, both at the North and South Pole. But if you look at this at Christmas time or in the middle of winter, this will be totally reversed. And these humongous, look how fast they're moving so fast. These humongous twirling currents will be coming out of the Earth and rotating counterclockwise. Because during the winter, we're near the Earth and we need to release some energy. And at the equinox, you can see them breaking up to go in different directions. So they discovered this might have something to do with weather patterns and climate and everything. It's electromagnetically driven, and it is. And you can follow the Birkeland currents down to the level of a tornado in positive and negative electrical charges. Because everything in the universe is energy twirling in motion, vortex energy in motion. And even to the atomic level and subatomic level in the body in terms of healing, it's all electrical energy rotating. This is amazing. It's not insignificant. And one of the most amazing things with this is, so when you investigate this on YouTube, be aware in this field of the electric universe, they also have the mythological aspect where in the ancient days, they report a lot of weird chaos in the solar system than today. And that's mythological, and that's really fine and interesting. Not so much into that because, well, it's hard to verify exactly what they saw, exactly what was going on, little question there. But we can look at the electrical model of the universe right now very, very, very closely, very accurately, and study it. Everything in the cosmos is formed from these electrical currents. It's beyond imagination. It's beyond belief. And the big one is comets. If there's anything that proves the electric universe, it's comets. Well, why would comets? Aren't they the balls of dust and snow? You know, even today, God, it's taken cosmologists. I will give them credit. They're like open-minded. They're like, wow, this is new. Let's look at it. So in 2005, they had these great satellites, and they sent them and caught up to some comets. And they were expecting a big ball of snowy dust with dust particles in it, because they were supposed to be formed out there on the edge of the solar system, and they had the primordial dust, and it was accumulated by gravity, forming planets. That's not how it happens. The other thing, they're now able to look at other solar systems, and they've decided everything we thought about planet formation is completely wrong. Everything. Because we looked at all these solar systems, you know what they discovered? Total uniformity. We have the weird solar system. Almost all other solar systems are equal, like peas in a pod, equal-sized planets equally spaced. Whether they're small, medium, or large, doesn't make any difference. We're the weird one, because we have these humongous gas giants, then that little asteroid belt, then the inner planets that are much smaller and of a different composition, right? So, yeah, we know nothing about the solar system, and they're great to admit it. That's what's so fantastic about the cosmologists. They're true scientists. It's like, hey, we don't know. We're going to have to find out. So they thought these comets were going to be just this big ball of snow and ice, because, you know, as the comets came in towards the sun, they warmed up, and they formed the coma and the tail, which is water, right? You think, oh, that's water, yeah, because they're water, they're frozen water and ice and all this. And guess what they discovered? Nothing they knew of comets was correct. But the electric universe people had studied this at great length. And prior to this 2005 event, where they took a satellite, traced down a comet, and they were going to shoot an 800-pound block of solid copper at it. And they thought, well, we're going to shoot this copper at this comet, we're going to whack it, and there'll be a big chunk of ice and water come out, you know, we're going to do this. And none of that occurred. But the 15 things the electric universe, like Thornhill is his name, scientist, the 15 things they predicted would happen did happen. First thing was, it's not a ball of ice, it's solid rock. Comets are solid rock, just like asteroids, complete solid rocks. You're like, so where's the water? It's got to be there somewhere. That's the scientists. It's got to be there somewhere. What is this solid rock? And they said, as you shoot that copper thing to it, and they'll be negatively charged, because the sun's positively charged, an anode, their cathode. They come into the inner environment, and it's not heat that causes the corona. This is the unbelievable. So anyway, you shoot this copper at it, and before it gets to the comet, you're going to see a spark flare off, because they hold tremendous electrical charge, as in tremendous electrical charge. Then you're going to see a huge explosion occur of this electric charge, which all occurred, and they got on film. The cool part was they had a second satellite come around several months later to the comet, because it looked like it had craters on it and fractures on it and all this stuff. That's nothing of what we predicted of comets. And they're going to look for the crater. It wasn't there. That comet didn't even crack the surface. And at one point, the NASA scientists said, well, what we think happened, so that 800-pound copper plate slammed into the comet, and it blew up, yeah, debris, not what we were expecting, and then gravity just pulled it back into the crater. Really? It's so absurd, even I know that's absurd. And they're like, really? Because the speed at which the particles left were at a speed, walking distance is all you have to do. You'd have to have just the speed of walking distance for those particles to never return to the comet. They would escape it permanently. So no, it all just came back, see, and filled with the comet. But they noticed a whole bunch of other things. As comets come in, they have these jet streams come out that are part of the coma. And they're thinking, well, the water heaves up and it spurts out through these jet holes. There's no jet holes. Electric universe people said the comet is negatively charged. It's solid rock. This is the wildest part. And as the comet approaches the sun, it's full of silica and minerals from the inner planets, because that's where the comets come from. Not the old dust and snow out there, from the asteroid belt destruction and the Valles Marineris on Mars, which is this huge Grand Canyon on Mars. And it's not the Mars thing is not the result of all kinds of the asteroid. These are from the inner planets. So when they, unfortunately, that's why we love NASA scientists, when they took particle samples from the comet, and when they analyzed it, they were like, wow, this is not what we expected at all. That should be their famous line. These elements can only be found in the inner planets, in the inner zone, not on the edge of the solar system. our models of comets are completely wrong. So when they came around and they discovered on these craters, you see these little sparks. The electrical activity in the comets eat the crater walls away. And NASA wouldn't confirm that. They go, well, we don't have high enough definition to prove that, but it appears it might be true. So you have this complete different picture of comets, and you can do that on YouTube. It's just astonishing. So what's the point of all this electrical universe? One, it's cool. It's totally different, brand new. Planets are formed from stars are formed from electrical currents, literally pinching down in these traditional plasma vortexes. So these filaments that are everywhere throughout the galaxies and the whole universe are all electrical currents of Birkeland currents. And everything performs exactly like it's supposed to because they're unbelievably huge electrical currents. Isn't that amazing? So why do we care about that? Well, it turns out there's one reason we really care about this. So here's this Birkeland currents coming into the sun, and the sun sends out its energy and has that weird, it gets stronger out here, very cool here. That's just so weird. It's not according to, it's so weird. No, it's not according to plasma electrical theory. It's exactly what it should do. So this group of Canadian scientists got together about 6-7 years ago, and we're going to replicate the electrical model of the sun in the laboratory. Well, who cares? So this is simple. They got just a metal box, put a steel rod in it, put a metal ball on top, filled it with hydrogen, because the sun is a nuclear process of hydrogen fusion that also transmutes metals throughout the sun. And that's all they did. And then they experimented with different charges, different heats. They start producing plasma on the surface of the ball, regulating the temperature, the pressure, the density of the hydrogen. They finally formed what is called the SAPHIRE project. This you want to Google, SAFIRE. Just Google SAPHIRE project. And around the ball, they finally got all the right proportion and everything. Around the ball formed multiple layers of plasma spheres, exactly like the sun. Well, we still don't care. Why is that important? They're self-regulating, self-adjusting. Why is that important? Because what we're trying to make is the fusion reactor. When we're spending billions of dollars on these football field size fusion reactors to take literally a piece of the sun on planet Earth. So here's this little piece of the sun, 100,000 degrees temperature, but you can't have it just hanging around. You have to put it in a magnetic donut or a magnetic basketball, because if it touches anything, it instantly will vaporize it. But we want that incredible energy and heat to run steam turbines for electricity and all this, but it's really been a not so easy thing to do, and it's always 30 years away, and always 30 years away, and always 30 years away. The point of this SAPHIRE project is they created a self-stabilizing, self-regulating multiple plasma field, and it's so beautiful in the videos, around this electric ball. And in doing this, they also discovered something interesting. As they're doing all these experiments, put stuff in there, change the temperature, change the degrees, it was going through the hydrogen fusion and transmuting and depositing elements on the ball, including uranium and gold, just like happens in the sun. Oh, it gets better. Okay, that's real interesting, but why does it get better? They literally reproduce the electrical activity of the sun in the laboratory. I mean, a monkey could go make the metal box, put the hydrogen there, just get the right temperature and voltage. But here's the important part. With a mere 200 watts of electricity, they were able to produce temperatures of 15,000 degrees centigrade. Now, if you know electricity and heaters, only 200 watts of electricity created a sphere generating 15,000 degrees centigrade, which they're going to use to run steam turbine engines to produce electricity. And it gets better than that. It only takes 200 watts to generate 15,000. The hydrogen is recyclable, reusable, and you literally have with this unlimited 100% pollution-free electricity with no limit. And they're building the first generator right now in Canada. And it's under the Arion company, so it's this group of scientists. So if this is allowed to go through and permitted to go through, and people go, well, it's not 100,000 degree temperature like the fusion reactant football fields over here that we've not been able to get to work yet. Yeah, it doesn't matter, we'll take 15,000, but they even said recently, no, we can easily, we just configure this way and we get 25,000 degrees centigrade out of it. no pollution, literally unlimited electricity with no pollution site. So people go, well, God, how does this work? Because it's the fusion, the hydrogen isotopes that are fused. And so these little, so you can't use the machine to like make gold. It's not going to make enough gold or enough uranium, stuff like that. It makes about 15, 16 elements. But the other thing they discovered was even quite interesting too. So, and I love true scientists, just throw the chicken salad in there, see what happens. Get a bug, throw it in there, see what happens. They put in radioactive waste, and you know what happened? It neutralized it. They have discovered a way to completely neutralize radioactive waste. Just saying. So they said, this is called Arion, is the company in Canada, it's an incorporated company, Arion. They said their business venture is going to be expected to be worth trillions upon trillions of dollars for the energy production alone and the inactivation of radioactive waste. Is that amazing? So that's the advantage of the electric universe and the electric sun model. God, that's just, and it's just, the video is so beautiful to see these plasma. At first they had little plasma nodules and then little balls and then little spikes, and when they got it tuned just right, here are these multiple beautiful layers of plasma just hanging around the metal sphere. See, and it doesn't get hot. Because just like the sun, the core of the sun does not get hot. It's only 6,000 degrees. It's 20 million out here. So it's the same, you know, scalable thing. Isn't that wild? So unless it's blocked, but the military is actually part of this. The United States military gave them extra scientific instruments to stuff because, you know, scientists really study stuff. We want to look at this in detail and all this. This could be, wow, beyond, just imagine unlimited electrical power, totally pollution-free. Works for me. Works for me. That's the good part of cosmology. UFOs. Remember I said enough about UFOs? Okay. And then we'll be done. UFOs, 2017, the New York Times released in December that news story on the videos of the, did y'all see them? The videos of the UFOs, 2017. Oh yeah, New York Times. Made a ripple. And it's like, and the Department of Defense and Navy clearly stated, these are not ours, they're not Russians, we don't know what they are. And you know what the public did? Oh. 2018, and they admitted this $60 million program had already been run, the Air Force and everyone else had been studying UFOs all the time, it was a total lie, total scam, and all this. Audience, 2018, they had the dude who ran the program come out on the news media to talk about this, and the public, again. And at this time, I'm thinking the Department of Defense is going, God, that, man, we covered it too much. Our stories of denial and cover-up were too strong. Now we can't even get them to buy it. So in 2020, an astrophysicist and former consultant in that program, Eric Davis, went back to the New York Times, and he told them that he had given a classified debriefing to the Defense Department agency in March of 2020, telling them we have recovered off-world vehicles, not ours.
Cool.
Told them. And the public, And at this point, the military's like, screw it. So I've seen a few stories since then in the middle part of this year. The military is like, well, just because we said that doesn't mean we said it. Because they're thinking, we're just going to put it back to just denial and closure. They're so stupid. If we tell them they're here, here's the little gray. See, the little gray. They're just, Can you believe that? And I'm thinking, it's your fault for covering it up. Because I don't want to tell too much about people. I have a lot of interesting clients. Some of them have many stars on their shoulder. And we discussed many things. And I was like telling this one person with many stars on his shoulder, the people are ready for it. They're not going to have a hissy fit. You're underestimating the shock this is going to give people. You're totally underestimating this stuff. It's kind of like the gay marriage thing. They thought the world would explode, and even the most conservatives in the Catholic Church were like, yeah, okay, whatever. Move on next. What's next? They didn't give a crap. I said the public, no. They're going to get tired of it in about 2 weeks, and then they'll be done with it. So astrologically, though, what's interesting with this, astrologically, which I didn't mention last time I was about to, is that the chance for actual contact astronomically, logarithmically increases by 2024. So it's like, we're waiting, where are they? We're waiting. Astrologically, after 2024, that door gets unhinged. So you could see not even too far after 2024, some much more substantial admission. Yeah, we're not alone in the universe by the officials. And I still think the public will... Is it a game we can play? Is it a video game we can play? Something we can shop for? Isn't that wild? Oh, Lordy. So back to the 2020 thing in 2024. So we're still in this intense modality. And so I hope I didn't offend or just shock too many people out there. But the reality of the climate change is that. The reality is that. CO2, man-made CO2, fossil fuels do contribute to the global climate picture insignificantly. The global climate picture has been and always will be naturally driven. Up too much. Our stories of denial and cover-up are too strong. Now we can't even get them to buy it. So in 2020, an astrophysicist and former consultant in that program, Eric Davis, went back to the New York Times, and he told them that he had given a classified debriefing to the Defense Department agency in March of 2020, telling them we have recovered off-world vehicles, not ours.
Cool.
Told them. And the public, oh. And at this point, the military's like, screw it. So I've seen a few stories since then in the middle part of this year. The military is like, well, just because we said that doesn't mean we said it. Because they're thinking, we're just going to put it back to just denial and closure. They're so stupid. If we tell them they're here, here's the little gray. See, the little gray. They're just, ah. Can you believe that, though? And I'm thinking, it's your fault for covering it up. Because I don't want to tell too much about people. I have a lot of interesting clients. Some of them have many stars on their shoulder. And we discussed many things. And I was like telling this one person with many stars on his shoulder, the people are ready for it. They're not going to have a hissy fit. You're underestimating the shock this is going to give people. You're totally underestimating this stuff. It's kind of like the gay marriage thing. They thought the world would explode, and even the most conservatives in the Catholic Church were like, yeah, okay, whatever. Move on next. What's next? They didn't give a crap. I said, the public, no. They're going to get tired of it in about 2 weeks, and then they'll be done with it. So astrologically, though, what's interesting with this, astrologically, which I didn't mention last time I was about to, is that the chance for actual contact astronomically, logarithmically increases by 2024. So it's like, we're waiting, where are they? We're waiting. Astrologically, after 2024, that door gets unhinged. So you could see not even too far after 2024, some much more substantial admission. Yeah, we're not alone in the universe by the officials. And I still think the public will... Is it a game we can play? Is it a video game we can play? Something we can shop for? Isn't that wild? Oh, Lordy. So back to the 2020 thing in 2024. So we're still in this intense modality. And so I hope I didn't offend or just shock too many people out there. But the reality of the climate change is that. The reality is that. CO2, man-made CO2, fossil fuels do contribute to the global climate picture insignificantly. The global climate picture has been and always will be naturally driven. And Valentina Zarkova, I forgot the part. I had it here in my notes. I can't believe I forgot it. So her paper was published. News, Valentina, where are you? Her paper was published, peer-reviewed paper in, where is that? Oh, right there, because it was at the end. June of 2019. Nature magazine. Very complex thing and all this. It was retracted March of this year. And they gave her no explanation. So why was my paper retracted? I'm not part of the Russian Trump conspiracy. Why did you retract my paper? They wouldn't give her an answer. So she and other colleagues pressed them, and it was discovered 2 climate scientists on the IPC side demanded it be retracted. And what was the reason? And they wouldn't tell them. And they said because they stated that solar inertial motion does not exist. Does not exist. High schoolers that study astronomy know solar inertial motion exists. The sun does not sit. They go, no, it doesn't exist. It sits at the exact center of the solar system. and the sun is constant, because they don't want any evidence of any kind counteracting its only CO2. Can't be this, can't be cosmic rays, can't be solar activity, can't be electromagnetic activity, can't be any activity. It's got to be just CO2. And she found out who had it pulled, and they're not putting it back. They said, we're under pressure, we're not putting it back. Isn't that wild? Interesting world we live in. But as Valentina said, the truth will be out. Give her about 4 years. And I love that, because on that one she goes, you may argue my modal of the sun, which the satellites prove, but she goes, but this, especially this solar inertial motion, which says we're warming right now naturally. And she goes, you can do, excuse me, anything you want. It will make no difference. More CO2, less CO2, no CO2, this, that, it makes no difference. This planet will warm more than 2.5 degrees in the next 600 years. And that's a pretty good warming, because it's not like normal temperature. We're talking about the global itself warming 2.5. That's a big warming. We'll be almost at the Roman warm period. I am done.
Thank you so much, Jim. We
You are
really
welcome.
appreciate you.